The first rays of morning sunlight pierced through the thin mist of the gray Whisper Mountains, illuminating the grim aftermath of the battle below Stone Tooth Pass. Benjamin, dragging his injured leg, limped slowly across the field. The fighting was over, but the air still tasted of iron and smoke. Diona walked beside him, her voice low and heavy. 27 dead, 42 seriously wounded. This is the loss of our standing army. Benjamin stopped before a row of bodies covered in rough linen. Beneath each sheet lay the tragedy of a family. He asked if the names were recorded, and Diona confirmed they were, promising that every pension would be paid in full. "Where are the prisoners?" Benjamin asked. Diona gestured toward 163 men huddled together like frightened sheep. Captain Kyle had suggested a brutal choice: execute them all or release them, but Benjamin looked at their young, terrified faces and shook his head. "Let them build the road," he commanded. "The path to Frosttown is too narrow. Let them earn their lives with sweat. It is both punishment and education." Turning his attention to the spoils of war, Benjamin ordered the weapons stored and the supplies divided. He insisted a third go to their allies from Silverbrook. "And the red wine?" Diona asked with a rare, faint smile. Benjamin decided to keep 5 barrels, 1 for tonight's victory, 2 for the wounded, and 2 to be sealed away for a day of true celebration. At the edge of camp, the aroma of salted meat soup finally overpowered the scent of death. Young Jeffrey brought Benjamin a bowl, wincing as he patted his bruised stomach. Benjamin took a sip, teasing the boy about his failed attempt at battlefield poetry, before Captain Kyle approached to say his farewells. "Barren," Kyle said solemnly, "Frosttown held the line alone. We were merely a garnish to your victory." He then handed Benjamin a secret letter found in the enemy commander's bag. Benjamin's eyes narrowed as he read. The western frontier had planned to join forces with the north to attack the ironclad territory, the home of his friend Ella. "This must reach the capital immediately," Benjamin declared. Kyle promised his fastest rider but couldn't resist a knowing smirk. He mentioned the 7 Nights Chronicles, a popular book series where Ella had written extensively about her friendship with Benjamin. Benjamin's face stiffened. Ella released a personal catalog. "Oh, it's a bestseller in the capital," Kyle laughed, "and your own bonus volume is receiving rave reviews." The air in Frosttown was thick with the scent of victory and wood smoke. As Benjamin led his weary troops through the town entrance, a tremendous cheer swept through the streets like a flash flood. Iron pots clattered, homemade horns blared, and children screamed with delight. Wildflowers, yellow, white, and purple, rained down upon the soldiers, their petals clinging to armor stained with dust and blood. "The heroes are back," the crowd roared. Amidst the chaos, Benjamin found his family. His parents, once trembling serfs, now stood tall with pride. His mother, Anna, rushed forward, sobbing as she pulled him into a fierce, trembling embrace. His father, Old Blackwood, simply patted his shoulder with a rough hand, whispering, "Well done, son." But the joy was fragile. As the wagons carrying the fallen slowly rolled in, the cheers died into a heavy silence. A suppressed sob broke the air as an old woman reached out to stroke the cold, linen-covered face of her son. Victory, Benjamin realized, always demands a price. He turned to his officer, Suleiman, his voice low and firm. "Take care of the families, tell them their sons were heroes. Frosttown will never forget." Exhausted, Benjamin limped toward the Baron's mansion. Every step on his wounded leg felt like the twist of a knife, but he had one desperate mission: to find Walter. The knight had taken dozens of arrows to save the town. Most assumed he was a dead man. Benjamin pushed open the study door. There sat Chesvia, her snow-white hair cascading over her shoulders like a shimmering waterfall. She looked up, her pale gray eyes deep and unreadable. "How is Walter?" Benjamin blurted out. "He is out of danger," she replied calmly. "He will wake soon." Stunned, Benjamin followed her to the infirmary. There lay Walter, breathing steadily. But as Benjamin leaned in, he gasped. The deep, jagged arrow wounds he had seen on the battlefield were gone, replaced by nothing but faint, pink scars. "How?" Benjamin whispered, staring at Chesvia. For a fleeting moment, her eyes seemed ancient, inhuman, as if a goddess were looking through them. Then she blinked and the mystery vanished. "I just helped a little," she said softly. She knelt to tend to Benjamin's own leg, her touch cool and healing. He watched her, the questions burning in his throat, but he chose silence. Walter was alive, the town was safe, and for now, that miracle was enough. In the center of the Frosttown square, a massive iron pot forged by Jean Blackwood sits atop a stone stove. It is large enough to hold an entire pig. Inside, the water bubbles with salt and herbs, creating a mysterious alchemical aroma. This is the soup of 100 families, a unique tradition where every resident tosses in an ingredient. From salted meat to unwashed carrots. Chesvia, the town's culinary expert, watches in horror as unpeeled potatoes and whole sausages are flung into the cauldron. "This is a complete waste of ingredients," she exclaims, her eyes flashing. Benjamin tries to soothe her, insisting it is the sentiment that matters. Chesvia isn't convinced. "You'll know what sentiment is," she mutters, "when you fish a pair of purple underwear out of that soup." The atmosphere shifts as Benjamin signals his men. Geoffrey and Pietro bring out barrels of fine red wine, spoils of war seized from the Western Frontier Army. Benjamin raises his voice over the crackling fire. "Tonight, let us celebrate our victory with the enemy's wine." But as Benjamin raises a glass to his lips, a hand snatches it away. It is Evelyn, his intelligence agent. "The Minister of Agriculture said you cannot drink until your leg injury has healed," she says firmly. Despite Benjamin's protests, she hands his wine to Geoffrey, who gulps it down and promptly chokes. Pulling Evelyn aside, Benjamin asks for news from Wolfsmouth Fortress. Her expression turns grave. She reports that a new envoy has arrived, plotting with a noble alliance to overthrow Grand Duke Charles. It seems the Viscount has already switched sides. Benjamin muses on the news. The enemy's internal strife is a blessing, but they must remain vigilant. Suddenly, cheers erupt. The stew is ready. 4 men heave the giant pot off the fire. An elderly woman hands Benjamin the very first bowl, a thick, brownish-yellow paste. Chesvia whispers a final warning about purple panties as Benjamin takes a brave, deep gulp. He freezes, then he takes another sip. The taste is actually not bad. The complex flavors of 100 homes have blended into something rich and savory. Soon, the square is a chorus of clattering spoons and laughter. Even Chesvia takes a sip, finally conceding with a small smile. "Sometimes," Benjamin says, watching his people celebrate under the warm firelight, "chaos can create beauty." Erwin Hawthorne sat behind his gold-trimmed oak desk, his brow furrowed deeply enough to trap a fly. Before him lay a ledger of mocking devils, numbers detailing the staggering cost of war: 250 gold shields for grain, 50 sets of armor, 40 pack horses, and the extra allowances paid to the knights who had volunteered to fight. "That kid Kyle took all the elites," Erwin muttered, his fingers trembling. "If they get wiped out at Stone Tooth Pass, it will cost 2.5 years of profit." In a fit of rage, he slammed his quill down, splashing ink onto his favorite silk shirt. He gritted his teeth, swearing that the next time the Blackwood boy came asking for money, he would be firm. He would negotiate. He would be a shrewd businessman. Suddenly, the study door burst open. Kyle stood there, armor caked in battlefield dust, his eyes shining like the midday sun. Erwin's heart sank. "Kyle, speak slowly. Do you need reinforcements?" "Reinforcements? No." Kyle's voice shook with triumph. "My lord, we've won. We annihilated the Western Frontier Army. Commander Karen is dead, and we've captured their supplies and a personal letter from the Grand Duke himself." Silence hung in the air for 3 seconds. Then, a burst of laughter erupted from Erwin, loud enough to shatter glass. He slammed his hands on the desk and began to dance around the room, waving his arms wildly. "I knew it. I knew that kid could do it. Charles's elite vanguard, nothing but clay chickens." He grabbed Kyle's shoulders, shaking him violently for details before leaping onto his desk to mimic a sword fight. "For Silver Creek territory, kill." "Father." His daughter, Lena, stood in the doorway, watching the display with a hand to her forehead. Erwin jumped down, nearly twisting his ankle, and shouted the news of the victory. He was ecstatic, jumping so hard the floorboards groaned. "Father, please calm down," Lena said. When he wouldn't stop, she calmly picked up a 20 gold coin Celadon vase and, thump, she hit him squarely on the back of the head. The pain cooled Erwin's frenzy instantly. As he nursed a lump the size of an egg, Lena laid out a strategic plan: consult Lord Blackwood first, strengthen the alliance, and host a grand victory banquet to show the world their strength. "And father," she added softly before leaving, "be a wise magnate, not a jumping squirrel." Left alone, Erwin rubbed his head and smiled. He looked toward Frosttown, his eyes gleaming with a new, predatory shrewdness. "Benjamin Blackwood," he whispered, "you must keep winning. The future of the Hawthorne family is now in your hands." The moment Walter opened his eyes, his first thought was not of pain, but a single, urgent question: how is the war going? He blinked, focusing on the shabby, familiar ceiling of the Baron's mansion in Frosttown. He was alive. As he sat up, his body felt stiff like rusty armor, but the excruciating pain he remembered from the battlefield was gone. He recalled the axe of Karen cleaving his plate, the sting of dozens of arrows, and falling into a pool of blood. Yet now he was merely sore. On the bedside table lay his chipped sword and a note from Benjamin. The letter confirmed a great victory. Karen was dead, the Western vanguard annihilated, and 160 enemies captured. Benjamin's tone was warm, mentioning a handmade champion's medal tucked under Walter's pillow. Walter reached down and felt the gold, a crude but heartfelt gift. He looked at his ruined blade, notched and cracked, and whispered, "Old man, you really should retire." After dressing, Walter stepped into the hallway, startling Benjamin's sister, Sarah. Despite her protests that he needed 2 weeks of rest, Walter insisted on seeing the Baron. As they walked through Frosttown, the air smelled of wood smoke and herbs. Townspeople and soldiers alike cheered at the sight of him, their gratitude acting like a tonic to his weary soul. Sarah led him to a massive, canvas-covered shed, a temporary hospital. Inside, the scent of mint and marigold was thick. Walter watched in awe as Chesvia, her white hair gleaming, performed precise surgeries. Men with wounds that should have been death sentences were breathing steadily, their flesh stitched with impossible neatness. Benjamin approached, his face lighting up with genuine shock. "You're actually awake," he exclaimed, nearly knocking over a basin. Walter thanked him for the medal and the sword. But Benjamin's eyes remained filled with a complex amazement. When asked how he felt, Walter admitted it was strange, as if the fatal injuries were merely a nightmare he had slept away. Benjamin patted his shoulder, a look of relief crossing his face. "Chesvia said you'd recover quickly," the Baron remarked, "but I didn't expect this. Since you're up, go to your soldiers, they need to see their champion." Benjamin stood by the second-floor window of the Baron's mansion, the morning sun warming his face as he traced the gold-embossed edges of a letter. It was a reply from the second princess, Celia, but the handwriting was a mess of panicked, contradictory commands. One moment she urged a retreat to the capital, the next she demanded they hold the line at all costs. Benjamin sighed softly. He remembered this. Back in their days with the heroic squad, Celia's logic would short-circuit whenever the pressure became too much. He sat at his desk to draft a response. He wrote of their victory at Stone-Tooth Pass and the new alliance with Silverstream territory, but then he paused. Simple comfort wouldn't be enough for a princess. He dipped his pen again, writing, "You are not alone in supporting this sky. We are all fighting in our own places. And we will get this kingdom back on its rightful path." As a final touch, he added a playful postscript. "Next time you're in a bad mood, draw a smiley face on the envelope, so I know to comfort you before I report the news." A knock at the door broke his focus. "My lord, the carriage is ready," Sullivan called out. Benjamin headed downstairs, adjusting his formal suit. The lobby was a sea of familiar faces. There was Walter standing tall in his knight's uniform, Evelyn, elegant in dark purple, and Diona, the rugged soldier, looking utterly miserable as he tugged at his stiff, formal collar. Benjamin's parents and siblings stood nearby, their faces glowing with pride. Then the room went silent. Chesvia descended the stairs. She wore a gown of deep navy silk as dark as a frozen night, which made her cascading, snow-white hair shine like starlight. She walked straight to Benjamin, and with a natural, quiet grace, she reached out to straighten his collar. "This dress suits you well," Benjamin whispered. "It's practical," she replied simply. Benjamin looked at them all, his family, his comrades, his survivors. "Friends," he said, his voice rising, "are you ready?" With a chorus of cheers, they boarded the carriages. As the wheels began to turn towards Silver Creek territory, Benjamin leaned back and closed his eyes. He felt the letter in his pocket, a message of hope destined for a princess struggling in the eye of the storm. The journey ahead was long, but for the first time in a long time, the path was clear. Erwin Hawthorne was a man possessed, spinning like a top under the lash of a whip. He had only 7 days to transform Hawthorne Manor into a venue worthy of the kingdom's elite. This wasn't just a party, it was a declaration of the alliance of Silverbrook and Frosthold. "Deep red curtains, the royal shade," he barked at the servants. "Poach the best chefs in the city, double their pay, and get the bards from Greenwood River. I want music that echoes from the southern reach." Irwin was everywhere at once, checking menus, arranging flowers, and obsessing over seating charts. He was halfway up a ladder to hang a flag himself when his daughter, Lena, finally stopped him. "Father," she pleaded, "leave this to the steward. You need to save your energy for the guests." Irwin's eyes shone with a manic intensity. "You don't understand, Lena. When I became Lord, I told the world I am here. But today I tell them I am important." He paced his study, gesturing wildly. "When those wavering lords see our victory in Frosttown, when they see the gold flowing into Silver Stream, they will know exactly which side to choose. This isn't a banquet, it is an investment." He nearly broke into a victory dance but caught himself. He sat down, breathing heavily. "Calm, shrewd, unfathomable," he muttered to the walls. "Don't dance, absolutely do not dance." On the morning of the event, Lena found him practicing a composed smile in the mirror. "Father, the guests are arriving," she said, "and Alpacas is here, the second princess's confidant, one of the 7 knights. We cannot keep her waiting." Irwin's eyes nearly popped. "Lord Pacas is here, why didn't you say so?" "I just did," Lena sighed. She then leaned in close. "One more thing, display the spoils from the Western Frontier Army in the side hall. The knight armors, the private seals, let the guests stumble upon them. It's more effective than any speech." Irwin clapped his hands in delight. "Brilliant, you truly have my mind, Lena." He took 3 deep breaths, straightened his coat, and stepped outside. The sight was breathtaking. A sea of carriages stretched to the horizon. Silk gowns shimmered and jeweled swords glinted in the sun. "I've spent a fortune," Irwin whispered, his nails digging into his palms. Then a predatory glint entered his eyes. "But I'll make it all back, with interest." He glided into the crowd, a perfect mask of aristocratic grace. He shook hands, deflected praise for the victory at Frosttown, and subtly steered every conversation toward the profit of joining the princess's cause. Finally, his gaze landed on a quiet corner. There sat Ella Pacas. She wore a simple gray dress, yet the air around her seemed to vibrate with power. Guests gave her a wide berth, sensing the lethal prestige of a knight of the realm. Irwin approached and bowed deeply. "Lord Pacas, your presence honors us." Ella looked up, her gaze sharp and unnervingly direct. "The banquet is well done, Lord Hawthorne, many people." "Friends of the princess," Irwin replied smoothly. Ella's lip twitched. "And Benjamin, has he not arrived?" "He is on his way with the delegation," Irwin smiled. Ella raised a skeptical eyebrow. "A delegation? He's certainly putting on airs." Irwin Hawthorne stayed by Ella Pacas's side for less than 10 minutes. The Ironforge Lord spoke like her family's weapons, direct, precise, and ruthless. When Irwin praised her metallurgy, she dismissed him with a sharp remark about his ledgers. When he mentioned the victory at Frosthold, she credited luck and preparation rather than skill. Every topic was met with a barbed, sarcastic deflection. Irwin eventually slunk away, wondering how the good-natured Benjamin Blackwood could ever be friends with such a prickly woman. He had barely caught his breath when the atmosphere shifted. Baron Guise of Blackrock arrived with his beautiful wife. The room fell into a wary silence. Blackrock nominally belonged to the Western region, and the Grand Duke was currently their enemy. Irwin greeted them with a beaming, practiced smile. Guise leaned in, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "Lord Hawthorne, are you recruiting new members for our regional development commune?" Irwin's eyes sharpened. He knew Guise had recently annexed 2 neighboring territories with ruthless efficiency. A dangerous man, ambitious, complex, and backed by the Earl of Dragonflame. But in these times, such men were the most valuable allies. "The commune's doors are always open to like-minded friends," Irwin whispered back before raising his voice for the crowd. "Please, come in, we must have a good drink today." Suddenly, a steward rushed to Irwin's side, whispering urgently. Irwin's face lit up. He stepped onto the central dais and clapped his hands, silencing the room. "Distinguished guests," he announced, "please allow me to introduce the true protagonist of tonight's victory. The hero of Stone Tooth Pass, Lord Benjamin Blackwood, and his delegation have arrived." The doors swung open. 4 veterans of the pass stood in gleaming half-armor, forming a guard of honor. Then, Benjamin entered. He wore a dark velvet tuxedo with silver trim, walking with a steady, heroic bearing that made many forget his humble origins. Behind him came his inner circle, Sullivan looking like a shrewd gentleman with a ledger in hand, Walter the knight, his hand resting warily on his hip, Evelyn moving with battlefield precision, and Diona looking uncomfortable but ready for action. Finally, the Blackwood family followed, wide-eyed at the lavish scene. But then the air seemed to freeze. Chesvia appeared, her navy blue gown swallowed the light, making her snow-white hair stand out like polar ice. She moved with a silent, haunting grace. The guests spontaneously parted, whispering in awe as the procession reached their host. Benjamin bowed slightly. Lord Hawthorne, the Frosttown delegation, is honored to attend. Irwin grasped his hand, turning to the crowd with a booming voice. Gentlemen, behold the man who held the Western Gateway against the rebels, Benjamin Blackwood. The hall erupted in thunderous applause. Benjamin remained composed, his voice steady as he addressed the room. The victory belongs to every soldier and every ally. Frosttown simply did what it had to do: defend our homeland and serve the kingdom. Benjamin Blackwood turned to his host, Irwin Hawthorne, offering his thanks for the grand banquet. Irwin grinned broadly, but before he could respond, a familiar figure cut through the crowd. It was Ella, as beautiful and haughty as ever. Her gaze swept over Benjamin, sharp and scrutinizing. "I heard you crippled Charles's vanguard," she remarked, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent room. Benjamin laughed, a sound of easy familiarity. "News travels fast, Ella. Is Ironforge truly concerned with our backwater affairs?" Ella scoffed, noting that a backwater could hardly support an army capable of driving away the west frontier. Benjamin shrugged and introduced his inner circle: Walter, his loyal knight; Sullivan, the political officer; Diona, his friend from the south; Evelyn, his secretary; and Chesvia, his advisor. Ella's eyes lingered on Chesvia, two captivating women locked in a moment of frozen, silent tension before she turned back to Benjamin. She revealed she was there on behalf of Princess Celia, a declaration that instantly lent royal legitimacy to Benjamin's victory. "Let's talk later," Benjamin whispered as they moved toward the main table. "I have some ideas about art." The feast was a spectacle of excess. First came the Victory Garden, an appetizer of intricate vegetable sculptures. Benjamin joked about the guilt of eating such craftsmanship, while Walter offered to conquer a carrot castle for him. Next came the barbecue parade. To a majestic march, servants carried roasted swans and wild boar. A master slicer presented Benjamin with the finest tenderloin, declaring that the victor deserved the best. The climax was a sugar sculpture extravaganza. Massive displays of sugar as expensive as gold depicted merchant ships and mountain passes. Irwin handed Benjamin a silver hammer to knock on the door of victory. With a strike, the sugar wall cracked to reveal a hidden goddess statue. While the crowd gasped in awe, Chesvia whispered a critique of the sugar's temperature and technique, prompting Benjamin to jokingly put her in charge of the next party's desserts. As the music swelled, a bard sang the legend of the hero squad. The lyrics painted Benjamin not just as a lord, but as the legendary kind servant from popular folklore, a man who was extraordinary in the ordinary. Irwin leaned in, whispering that this was more than a story, it was a prophecy of Benjamin's future. Benjamin sipped his wine, realizing the true purpose of the night. This wasn't just a party, it was a declaration. Silverbrook was telling the world that their hero had a legendary past, a bright future, and the power to change the world. As the last dessert was removed and the bards fell silent, the atmosphere in the banquet hall shifted. The relaxed expressions of the nobles vanished. The real highlight was beginning. Irwin Hawthorne stepped onto the stage, a shrewd smile playing on his lips. "Distinguished guests," he began, his voice carrying across the room, "we gather to celebrate a victory for justice. Even in turmoil, there are forces willing to safeguard order and pledge allegiance to the monarchy." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "And such forces are strongest when they are united." With a sudden shift to a lighter tone, Irwin gestured to the band. As elegant dance music filled the air, he discreetly approached Benjamin. "Lord Blackwood," he whispered, "please, come with me." They left the noise behind, entering a quiet study lit only by a flickering fireplace. Irwin poured 2 glasses of amber spirits. His face grew serious. "I want your reputation to spread throughout the entire kingdom of Windwind," Irwin said, his eyes gleaming. "I want everyone to know who turned the tide at the western border." Benjamin raised an eyebrow, noting that the Battle of Stonetooth Pass was hardly a decisive victory for the entire Civil War, but Irwin leaned forward. Not now, but I believe in your future. I want to expand the regional development commune into a genuine trans-territorial alliance. Benjamin remained silent, watching the flames. He remembered the warning from his administrator, Sullivan. The royal family is preoccupied, but once you take this step, there is no turning back. The risks were immense. He thought of Chesvia, whose snow-white hair could no longer be hidden from the prying eyes of the pale church. He thought of his old friends in the hero squad. Would they be allies, or would they become enemies? The firewood crackled. Benjamin closed his eyes, hearing a voice from his past, an unknown nobody, or someone famous throughout the world. He opened his eyes and downed his drink in one gulp. Lord Hawthorne, Benjamin said firmly, there is no way out for a lone warrior on this land. Irwin's eyes lit up. They agreed to move steadily, focusing first on resource sharing and intelligence to avoid drawing too much fire from their enemies. As Benjamin pushed open the study door, the music and laughter of the banquet rushed back in. Everything looked the same, but he knew everything had changed. He would no longer be a nobody. He would become a living legend. Soft, soothing music filled the air as aristocratic men and women twirled in elegant arcs across the dance floor. In the corners of the hall, business and politics were forged in hushed tones over raised glasses. As Benjamin Blackwood stepped into the hall, he was immediately swarmed by young noble ladies with bright eyes and flushed cheeks. "Lord Blackwood, may I have this dance?" one asked, while another began reciting her lineage. Benjamin prepared a polite raise. Ponce, but a familiar, sarcastic voice cut through the chatter from behind him. "Looks like I've interrupted your good time." It was Ella. She stood with her arms crossed, her gray dress gleaming coldly under the lights. Her posture screamed displeasure, the same "how dare you keep me waiting" look from their old hero squad days. Benjamin turned, flashing a smile that was 3 parts sincerity and 7 parts flattery. "How could that be, Lady Ella? I've been looking for you everywhere. After all, the brightest star in the hall isn't some country baron like me." Ella's lips relaxed. She extended a hand. "Good to know. As an apology, you shall teach me the first dance." As they stepped onto the floor, Benjamin took her hand, feeling the faint calluses from her swordsmanship. "Are you sure?" he teased. "You used to call me clumsy." "Even now I find it disgusting," Ella muttered, her face darkening. "You just stepped on my skirt." "Terribly sorry." The music shifted to a courtly tune. Benjamin placed a hand on Ella's waist. Though his dancing still lacked grace, Ella was steady, guiding him through every turn with precise, controlled strength. "Still haven't learned to dance, I see," Ella whispered as they spun. Benjamin laughed. "In Frosttown, we build foundations and cultivate land. It's more practical than dancing." As the next song began, they stayed on the floor, lowering their voices. "So," Benjamin asked, "how is it going with those artworks?" Ella's expression shifted to professional annoyance. "The blueprints you sent, seamless, hollow, heat-resistant. The craftsman asked if you were making toys for the gods. I scrapped 3 sets of molds just to meet your precision." She rolled her eyes, then added softly, "But it's done. The items are in my carriage." Benjamin squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Ella. I'm truly happy to have a friend like you." Ella's face suddenly flushed. She looked away, making a strange, choked sound. "Stop with the nonsense. Let's get down to business." They spoke of Ironforge, of taxes, mining guilds, and the looming threat of the Northern Army. Prince Alchia needed weapons, and Ironforge was the prize. Ella frowned, mentioning that Celia wanted to send reinforcements from Stone Cliff. "I don't want to owe Calvin a favor," she grumbled. "That deadpan guy always looks down on me." Benjamin chuckled. "Don't worry. In his eyes, I'll always be the lucky errand boy." As the dance ended, a polite cough interrupted them. Chesvia stood at the edge of the floor, her snow-white hair shimmering like moonlight. She watched them quietly. An invisible current of wariness passed between the two women. Ella released Benjamin's hand, her voice turning distant. "It seems your special advisor is waiting." She turned to leave, but as she brushed past Benjamin, she leaned in and whispered urgently, "Be careful of this white-haired woman. She looks like she's from the Pale Church." With that, she vanished into the crowd. The music of the banquet hall hummed with a frantic energy, but Benjamin Blackwood found himself drifting from the dance floor. He jokingly invited Chesvia to dance, but she declined with a subtle shake of her head. "Evelyn asked me to remind you," she whispered, "that dancing with the same lady for more than 3 songs is considered A special hint? With a quiet nod, she slipped away toward the garden, preferring the cool night air to the suffocating scent of perfume and ambition. Left to his own devices, Benjamin's gaze settled on his administrator, Sullivan. The man was already at work, surrounded by lords who looked more like shrewd merchants than warriors. Benjamin joined them, his smile perfectly practiced. "I overheard you discussing trade routes," he asked. The lords beamed. To them, Benjamin was no longer just a frontier baron, he was a rising power. With a nod from Benjamin, Sullivan began to weave a persuasive net of words, speaking of stable grain outputs, the security of Stone Tooth Pass, and the shared prosperity of a joint chamber of commerce. The business talk was interrupted by a waiter's whisper. Benjamin excused himself to a private reception room where Baron Guise of Blackrock waited. The atmosphere here was different, sharper. Guise handed over a sealed letter from Earl Dragonflame, along with a promise of 40 sets of cavalry armor. "The Earl is pleased," Guise noted with a dangerous smile. "Grand Duke Charles is facing trouble in his own backyard. His retaliation won't come this autumn." Guise leaned in, his tone turning serious. He spoke of living space and the price of betrayal, admitting he had already annexed 2 neighboring territories that had dared to side with the rebels. "In this era," Guise remarked coldly, "weakness itself is a sin." A knock at the door signaled the night's climax. Benjamin and Guise returned to the hall where Erwin stood upon a platform. With a flourish, Erwin proposed a trans-territorial alliance, a local united commune to coordinate defense and trade. Benjamin stepped up to the light, his voice was steady, his words unadorned. "In turbulent times," he told the crowd, "we must stick together for warmth." He spoke of shared intelligence and secure roads, a support force for the kingdom. The applause that followed was thunderous. Though in a room filled with such calculating minds, it was impossible to tell where the sincerity ended and the theater began. At Benjamin's sincere invitation, Ella is the first to step onto the stage, becoming a full member of the new commune. She signs the ledger with her chin raised, radiating an air of condescension, yet she cannot hide her satisfaction at being the center of attention. With the Ironforge Lord leading the way, the hall erupts with eager nobles. However, Erwin steps forward to cool their fervor. He politely explains that the commune is not a common market, it requires screening. He leads the hopefuls to a side hall for tea and consultation, leaving the main celebration to roar on. Amidst the flowing wine and music, a gentle voice calls out, "Lord Blackwood." It is Lena Hawthorne, the young lady of Silver Creek. Her cheeks are flushed, her golden hair shimmering in the firelight. She asks softly, "May I have this dance?" Benjamin accepts. As they move, Lena's hand trembles with nerves. She confesses her deep admiration not for his title but for his journey from serf to lord. She admits that whenever she struggled to manage the Silver Creek Merchant Guild, she thought of his resilience. Benjamin offers a polite, modest reply, but Lena turns serious. She whispers her distrust of the Fairweather nobles joining tonight. Benjamin calms her with a cold, warrior's smile, assuring her that real power remains with the core members. If the newcomers do not behave, they will learn who the true masters are. As the dance ends, Benjamin slips away from the noise, seeking the quiet of the moonlit garden. There, he finds Chesvia sitting by a fountain, her white hair glowing like silver. He tries to tease her about her love of sweets, but her response stops him cold. "Benjamin, don't forget your name." Her voice is lower, magnetic, and when she turns, Benjamin gasps. Her pale eyes have turned a deep blood red. Before he can react, she seizes his wrist with terrifying iron strength. She drags him into a wild, aggressive dance, a ritualistic movement with no music but the splashing water. Benjamin struggles, but her power is overwhelming. Suddenly, she stops. She presses a finger to her lips, smiles an inhuman smile, and vanishes into the shadows. Benjamin is left panting, his wrist throbbing, when Ella appears at the garden gate. She is suspicious, but Benjamin hides his shock, claiming he only needed fresh air. As he follows Ella back to the hall, he glances one last time at the tranquil garden, wondering if the woman with the ruby eyes was ever really there at all. 3 iron-rimmed cargo wagons sat parked in the shadows, each harnessed to a team of 4 powerful horses. With a sharp gesture, Ella signaled the guards to throw open the heavy rear doors. Inside, wooden crates lay neatly arranged, cushioned by layers of protective hay and linen. Ella crossed her arms and tilted her chin, her voice a cocktail of impatience and hidden vulnerability. "See for yourself," she challenged. Benjamin stepped forward, his breath hitching as he pried open the first crate. He froze. What lay within was not the crude metalwork he had expected, it was a masterpiece. The cylinder's surface was a perfect mirror, gleaming with a cold, metallic luster under the flickering torchlight. There were no seams, no casting marks. It looked as if it had grown naturally from a single block of steel. He picked up a piston ring, thin as a wafer, yet incredibly strong. The seal was so precise it was practically invisible. "This is," Benjamin whispered, breathless. "It was made to your blueprints," Ella said, stepping to his side. She casually tossed a heavy valve component into the air, a 3-pound hunk of steel catching it as easily as an apple. "You wanted it smooth, I controlled the shape. You wanted uniform thickness, I personally supervised the molten pour. You said it had to withstand the fires of hell." She shoved the valve into his hands. "I used my Nen blade to temper every piece. You could throw these into a furnace for an hour and they wouldn't lose their shape." Benjamin examined the rest, bearing balls perfectly round, valve stems straight as a ruler. He knew Ella's blade of thought was capable of great things, but this level of exquisite detail was beyond his wildest dreams. Ella watched him, feeling a surge of triumph like a cat with its prize. She didn't mention the sleepless nights, the failed attempts, or the way the master craftsman of Ironforge had given up in despair. To the hero's squad, Ella Parkas had to be omnipotent. Benjamin looked up, his expression profoundly serious. "I must express my deepest respect to you, the great and wonderful Miss Ella." With the grace of a true aristocrat, he knelt on one knee, took her hand, and placed a solemn kiss upon it. Gurgled. Ella let out a strangled gasp, jerking her hand back as if scorched. Her face turned a violent shade of crimson. "For a Parka's heir," she stammered, "this is a piece of cake, nothing at all." Benjamin stood, his smile warm and sincere. "It may be nothing to you, but my gratitude is everything. Thank you, Ella." Ella tried to regain her composure, though her cheeks remained flushed. "What are these for anyway? They have no patterns, no jewels, no noble would want them." Benjamin traced the mirror finish of the cylinder. "This is an artwork for the future, Ella. It will change how we work, how we travel, even how we fight. In a sense, you are its mother. Without you, these would just be lines on a page." "Mother?" Ella blinked, then a realization struck her and her face went from red to purple. Then the father is. She cut herself off, eyes wide with horror. Benjamin froze, then burst into a sudden loud laugh. You're not allowed to think that." Ella stomped her foot, her voice a frantic stammer. I mean, you bastard." She turned and bolted into the night, her hair whipping behind her. She stopped once to glare back, shouting, "Don't be so arrogant, you handyman," before vanishing around the manor corner like a startled dragon. Benjamin stood alone, looking down at the cold steel in his hands. "Father," he shook his head with a faint smile. As a traveler from another world, he had failed to create guns or electricity, but as he looked at the parts for his steam engine, he felt a spark of hope. At least in this world, boiling water still produced steam. The next day, under the watchful eye of Irwin, 15 lords, including those from Frostholtz, Verbrook, Ironforge, and Blackrock gathered in the manor hall. Amidst the scent of sealing wax and the scratching of quills, they officially signed the documents to form the local United Commune. With the ink still wet, Benjamin Blackwood took the floor. He urged the members to spread word of his victory at Stonetooth Pass, emphasizing that the alliance needed more investment and more attention. He spoke of a secure trade network where the wines of Grape Valley could reach Frosttown and textiles from Silverstream could flow to Ironforge. To Benjamin, it sounded like the empty promises of a modern financial symposium, but to the lords, it was a revelation. Even Ella, the fierce leader of Ironforge, was moved. She whispered an offer to invest her own gold, but Benjamin stopped her. "Investment is good," he cautioned in a low voice, "but use your money to strengthen your own defenses first. Remember, you can invest other people's money freely, but you must be careful with your own." Benjamin spent the following hours helping Ella navigate the challenges of her territory, from stubborn mining guilds to the looming threat of war. "The war has begun, Ella," he said, spreading a map across his study. He advised her not to hoard her gold but to spend it, improving miners' lives, raising wages, and repairing roads. "Only money spent," he told her, "can become real power." As the convoy prepared to leave, Lena Hawthorne came to the carriage to say goodbye. Her voice was soft, her cheeks flushed as she promised to spread Benjamin's fame to distant lands. Her gaze was intense, leaving Benjamin somewhat overwhelmed as he hastily boarded his carriage. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Chesvia was back to her teasing self, mocking the way the noble ladies looked at Benjamin. But Benjamin didn't bite. He stared at her until the air froze. "Yesterday in the garden," he began calmly, "your eyes turned red, you were incredibly strong, and you said a bunch of nonsensical things." Chesvia's playful facade crumbled, fragments of memory surfaced, the fountain, the crimson vision, the uncontrollable force. "Damn it," she muttered, "it really was me." She confessed that to save Walter's life, she had deepened her connection with the pale goddess. Her power had grown, but the cost was high. She was now a beacon for the pale church, a target that could no longer be hidden. "My hair," she sighed, leaning back as the carriage rolled toward the horizon. "I won't be able to cover it up anymore." The previous night's chaos had not truly ended. Inside the moving carriage, Benjamin stared at Chesvia, his voice thick with disbelief. "So you really don't remember anything?" Red eyes, dragging me to the garden, forcing me to dance the women's steps. Chesvia frowned, searching her memory. "Only fragments," she admitted. "Moonlight, a fountain, and a strange urge, like another person inside me wanted fresh air." She shrugged it off with chilling casualness. Let's just call it intermittent madness." The silence that followed was broken when Chesvia demanded snacks from Evelyn. The stoic intelligence agent reluctantly produced a bag of expensive, glistening candied fruit. Benjamin's eyes widened. "When did we get these? We only had hard bread and jerky." Sullivan leaned in, stroking his chin. "I recognize these. They are honey-preserved berries from Hawthorne Manor, a silver coin per dish." All eyes fell on Evelyn. Her ears turned a rare, bright red as she muttered, "I figured nobody would want them." As laughter erupted, she regained her composure, insisting she was simply recycling resources that the nobles would have wasted. As evening fell, the carriage reached the gates of Frosttown, but the homecoming was short-lived. A nervous guard rushed to Benjamin's side. "Sir, a strange man is here, blond, well-dressed, a follower of the spirit garden. He sat in the administrative center all day, didn't eat, didn't move, just waiting for you." Benjamin and Chesvia exchanged a sharp look. "Bishop Aphrodite." They found him on the stone steps, bathed in the golden sunset, clutching a red rose. The bishop rose with an elegant bow. "Lord Blackwood, it has been a long time." Benjamin apologized for the wait, but Aphrodite shook his head. "Waiting is cultivation," he said softly. His gaze drifted to Chesvia's white hair. "I intended to return in the spring, but the goddess issued a divine decree." "An oracle?" Benjamin asked. "Yes," Aphrodite replied, his voice filled with a mix of piety and confusion. "The goddess said Frosttown is a place where life and tranquility are balanced. She told me to come here and learn the techniques of specimen preparation." The air went still. "Call me teacher," Chesvia said, her voice light and mocking. "I'm a professional at bone cleaning and taxidermy." Benjamin quickly covered Chesvia's mouth, laughing nervously, but the bishop nodded earnestly. "The goddess must have a deeper meaning. I shall learn with humility." Chesvia pulled away, her eyes flashing. "Perhaps she was simply impressed by my skill. Is not solidifying death into eternal art the ultimate doctrine?" Aphrodite's blue eyes sharpened. "Madam, do not be rude to the goddess." The two locked eyes, and in the fading light, invisible electricity crackled between them. Benjamin quickly stepped in to smooth things over, his voice hurried as he addressed the visitor. "Don't mind her, Mr. Aphrodite. Our minister, well, she simply admires the goddess of the sacred garden a little too directly." Benjamin struggled to find the right words, but Aphrodite interjected, his blue eyes piercingly calm. "You just don't like me." "I didn't say that," Benjamin denied it decisively, though inwardly he groaned. This bishop looked gentle, but his insight was frighteningly sharp. Aphrodite smiled and changed the subject. "If you agree, I'd like to find a secluded spot in Frost Town to build a ch. Appel. It doesn't need to be large, just enough for daily prayers." Relieved, Benjamin nodded. "Of course, there is a birch forest on the west side, quiet, peaceful. I can even get the town's construction team to help speed things up." "No." Aphrodite stood up abruptly. For the first time, his composed face showed a flash of terror. "Absolutely no help needed." His voice was several octaves higher than usual. He took a deep breath, regaining his posture, but his tone remained firm. "It only takes me and a few fellow believers. We must manage on our own." The room fell into a bewildered silence. Benjamin stammered, "I only meant to." "I understand your intentions, Baron," Aphrodite said, his back ramrod straight. "But this is a core commandment. Only believers may place every brick, every beam. To do otherwise is a grave sin." He looked at the group, his gaze heavy. "Have you heard of the Silent Church incident in Ash Valley?" Evelyn looked up, her voice hoarse. "In the South, that story stops children from crying at night." Aphrodite nodded. 5 years ago, a bishop in Ash Valley sought help from a local earl to build a magnificent cathedral. It was a grand success until news reached Pope Saliham. "The Pope stood before that church all night," Aphrodite whispered. "At dawn, he drew his twin swords, the blades of retribution and sin. He didn't burn the building, he purified it. The entire structure turned to fine, grayish-white dust overnight." A cold chill settled over the room. Aphrodite continued, "The Pope broke 70% of that bishop's bones with the back of his blade. He later told us, 'I reflect on my actions, I was indeed too ruthless. But if I see this again, I will be there immediately.'" Benjamin stood up, grabbing Aphrodite's shoulders with a vow of absolute seriousness. "I understand, Your Excellency. I assure you, no one will interfere. Not even a single plank will be moved for you." As the meeting ended and they stepped out into the twilight of Frost Town, Benjamin rubbed his temples. Between a pope who turned churches to dust and a minister who spoke her mind too freely, he realized the invading armies of the West weren't his biggest problem. For now, his primary mission was simple: ensure that absolutely no one helped build that church. A few weeks after the banquet in Silver Creek, a message swept across the kingdom of Rising Wind like an autumn breeze. It was the legend of a miracle. A remote border town with a mere 100 defenders had decisively defeated 500 elite vanguard troops under the Grand Duke of the West, the hero of this tale. Benjamin Blackwood, a young baron born to serfs, who once served as a humble servant to a band of heroes. At first, the capital dismissed it as a clumsy exaggeration, but as precise details emerged, names of captured commanders and lists of seized spoils, the skeptics fell silent. During a royal meeting, the second Princess Celia casually mentioned that a border army loyal to the crown had repelled the rebels at Stone Tooth Pass. She didn't say his name, but everyone knew. Soon, the official Kingdom Chronicles carried a brief, hesitant report. However, it was the wandering bards who truly gave the story wings. Armed with lutes and new ballads, they sang in every tavern and noble salon. They sang of the son of a serf who once laid carpets for heroes, but now stands before an army with a cold gaze and a sharp sword. Deep within the palace, Princess Celia sat in her private study, surrounded by maps and the heavy weight of rebellion. Her brothers were either traitors or uselessly neutral. Just as powerlessness threatened to overwhelm her, a letter arrived. It was from Benjamin. His handwriting was messy but powerful. He detailed the victory with calm objectivity, concluding with a promise: "Frosttown will stand at the gateway to the west, buying time for you and for the kingdom." At the very end, he added a playful note: "If you are in a bad mood, draw a smiley face on the envelope so I know to comfort you first." Celia's lips curled into a smile, the first in a long time. The boy who once carried her luggage and made her hot soup had grown into a tree that could weather any storm. He had proven the rebels were not invincible. Her eyes ignited with a new determination. She could no longer stay trapped in the capital's politics. Tracing the map toward the southern territory, she began to write. Benjamin had lit the first beacon of hope on the western frontier. Now it was her turn to light the second in the south. Morning sunlight streams through the stained-glass windows of Ironforge, casting dappled patterns across the study floor. Ella Pacas, dressed in a bathrobe and standing barefoot on a thick wool carpet, scans the latest Kingdom Chronicle. Her eyes find a small note at the bottom of the page, a report on the battle at Frosttown, explicitly naming her as a supporter of the new local United Commune. She snorts, but her chin rises with unconscious pride. The moment is brief. Her old butler appears, his face etched with worry. 3 groups of refugees, over 100 people, have arrived from the north, fleeing the brutal clearing operations of Lord Calvin in Stone Cliff. Ella's good mood vanishes. "Refugees," she frowns, "we don't produce food here." The butler explains they came for her reputation. Ella is frustrated. She knows metal and ledgers, not humanitarian aid. In a fit of irritation, she commands the butler to write a letter to the omnipotent handyman in Frostshire, Benjamin Blackwood. Ask him how to deal with them, she snaps. As the butler leaves, Ella mutters at Benjamin's name in the paper, annoyed that he has found a way to dump even more trouble on her lap. Meanwhile, at the bloody border of Stone Cliff, Calvin removes his stained gloves. He stands amidst a silent massacre of rebel farmers and mercenaries. His silver-gray R. Moore is slick with crimson. He is haunted by a single question: why do they rebel against Celia, the perfect leader? His thoughts drift to the west, to Benjamin. The news of Benjamin's decisive victory at Stonetooth Pass pierces Calvin's nerves like a needle. He feels a tightening in his chest. While other lords are distracted, the man he once dismissed as a mere handyman has become a hero. I must not lose to him, Calvin whispers, his grip tightening on his sword. He vows to purify the land through slaughter, desperate to prove he is the only one worthy to stand by the Queen's side. Far away in the hazy, incense-filled air of the pale church, Livia kneels in prayer. Beside her stands Percival Blackwood, Benjamin's brother, now a knight apostolic. When Livia asks if he is proud of Benjamin's glory, Percival's gaze remains chillingly empty. Earthly blood ties, he says, his voice steady as scripture, are as insignificant as morning dew. Livia sighs, sensing the self-destructive piety in him. Percival has chosen to burn away his past, turning himself into a cold weapon for the church, even as his brother's name begins to echo across the kingdom. Deep within the southern Green River land, the air is thick with humidity and the scent of ancient pines. Finn, his golden hair catching the filtered sunlight, scoops a handful of cool spring water from a stream, washing away the fatigue of the march. This is the heart of the guerrilla territory, a hidden sanctuary of wooden cabins and moss-draped tents. As Finn walks through the camp, he is met with a chorus of respect. A young girl drying herbs beams at him, a scout boasts of the disguise techniques Finn taught him, a veteran asks for orders. Finn moves with light steps, pausing to check a vegetable plot or help an old woman with a heavy bucket, before entering the leadership log cabin. Inside, a scholar holds up a book titled *The New Seven Knights*. It claims Finn single-handedly lured away an entire army. Finn laughs softly. Artistic embellishment, he says, though he admits the story is a good read. His eyes drift to a thinner volume on the table, Benjamin Blackwood, Stories Beyond the Legends*. A proud, warm smile touches his lips. He speaks of Benjamin not as a legend, but as a student who was once clumsy yet has now grown into a man Finn can brag about. But the moment of sentiment passes quickly. Finn turns to the hand-drawn map on the table, his voice turning sharp and focused. Time for chit-chat is over, he declares. Let's decide on the next target. The scene shifts far to the north. In the chilly autumn air of Frosttown, a different kind of fire is burning. Inside a cramped shed, a steel monster lets out a rhythmic, deafening rumble. This is Benjamin's Unit 01. It is a clumsy beast of cast-iron boilers and copper pipes, shaking the very ground with every strike of its mechanical hammer. Benjamin, his face smeared with black oil and sweat, squats B. Why the machine? Beside him, Chesvia shouts over the roar, noting the violent vibrations, while Sullivan frantically scribbles data. It is loud, it is ugly, and it consumes far too much coal. But as Benjamin signals the team to shut down the furnace, a heavy silence settles over the room. He looks at the machine with a fierce, visionary light in his eyes. It isn't perfect, but it ran for 4 hours straight. A blacksmith needs to rest, Benjamin tells his team, but this can work day and night. He pats the hot iron boiler. This crude, noisy engine is the first spark of a new era, the first step toward a future where Frosttown's industry will roar louder than any army. Sullivan felt like a spinning top, whipped into a frenzy by the endless demands of Frosttown. Government affairs, commerce, and resource allocation piled upon his desk like autumn leaves. 3 quill nibs were already worn down to nubs, and he was seriously considering asking Chesvia for a homemade ink recipe just to save a few coins. Yet, he loved it. In Frosttown, he was no longer a dispensable decoration of the court, he was the very backbone of the land. Pausing to rub his aching wrists, he looked out the window. There was Sarah, Benjamin's 4th sister, leading townspeople in a linen count. Once illiterate, she was now becoming a master of supply distribution. It is time, Sullivan mused, to let her handle the core accounts. Frosttown needed reliable people, and Sarah was growing rapidly. His focus shifted to a letter on his desk from his former master, Lauren, one of the Seven Knights. The future head of the kingdom's largest business family was suddenly curious about Frosttown's local cooperative. Between the elegant lines, the subtext was clear. Lauren saw the value in what they had built and wanted to reclaim Sullivan as his subordinate. Sullivan's lips curled into a cold, unfriendly smile. When he was first sent away, he was treated like an old suit that no longer fit. Now that he had helped craft a miracle, his value was remembered. He spread out a new sheet of paper. He would reply not as a servant, but as the chief administrator of Frosttown. He would discuss trade, timber, and iron, but the hints of his return, those he simply ignored. Leaving his office, Sullivan headed toward his daily habit, checking in on Evelyn, the intelligence agent from the north. He found her writing a report to her true master, Hill. "My eyes are so blurry lately," Sullivan muttered, leaning in with feigned exhaustion. His eyes darted across her parchment, catching mentions of steam prototypes and Chesvia's strange behavior. Before Evelyn could react, he snatched a pen and fluidly crossed out several sensitive lines. "A small suggestion," he said with an amiable smile. "We must learn to be tactful." Evelyn's gaze turned sharp. "I don't understand your purpose." "No purpose at all," he replied, closing the door behind him. His smile faded. Evelyn was useful, but her loyalty to the North was a ticking clock. Turning the corner, he ran into Benjamin, covered in oil and coal dust. The young lord immediately began rambling about trade ratios and winter wheat budgets. Sullivan listened, his mind already organizing the chaos. Perhaps the man who turned serfs into barons could also turn a northern spy into a permanent fixture of Frosttown. It was indeed a pleasantly busy autumn. Sullivan waited for the perfect moment to interrupt. Benjamin had been rambling about budget reports and winter wheat, his coat still stained with coal dust from the foundry. "There are matters of a personal nature we must discuss, sir," Sullivan whispered. Benjamin stepped away from the heat of the machines, seeking fresh air. A few minutes later, the two men strolled down the newly paved roads of Frosttown. The autumn sun was warm, and the town bustled with life. Sullivan spoke first, his voice low and cautious. "It is about Evelyn. She is loyal, yes, but her heart belongs to Lady Hill. If Frosttown's interests ever clash with the Pearl of the North, she will become our greatest threat." Benjamin toyed with a jagged, failed gear in his pocket. "I understand," he replied, his casual tone masking a sudden seriousness. "I will handle it." The conversation shifted to business. Lord Lauren's caravan had arrived, bringing linen, spices, and the rare dust crystals Benjamin had requested. The price was staggering, thousands of gold guilders, even with a friendly discount. "Lauren is a shrewd man," Sullivan warned, his tone sharpening. "He treats people like goods, resources to be bought and sold. He wants to influence our commune by recalling his old subordinates. You must set boundaries, my lord." Benjamin stopped walking. "Sullivan, do you know how long we were in the hero squad together?"
6 years, sir."
6 years, Benjamin repeated, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "I know their flaws, Lauren's need for control, Ella's pride, my own failures, but for 6 years no one left. We were bound by a desire to change things, to protect the weak. I have to believe that, when faced with a choice, they will remember that dream and choose the right path." Sullivan hesitated. "And what exactly is the right path?" Benjamin laughed softly. "To free the weak from fear, to never bow to unjust power, to make the world just a little bit better than we found it." They turned toward the edge of the birch forest where the Spirit Garden Church was being built. Progress was pitiful. Bishop Aphrodite, his golden hair tied back and his white robes caked in mud, was struggling to move heavy stones. "We are not craftsmen," the bishop sighed. "Doctrine forbids outsiders from helping with the construction." Benjamin's eyes lit up with a clever spark. "But what about lay believers, those who provide suggestions rather than labor?" Without waiting for an answer, Benjamin grabbed a pen and began redesigning the church's uns. Table sketches, optimizing load-bearing walls and triangular supports with the precision of an engineer. As the sun began to set, casting long, amber shadows, the two men walked back toward the town. "Sullivan," Benjamin asked suddenly, "what is it that you want? Money, status?" Sullivan looked at the rising smoke of the peaceful town. I used to want to prove myself to those who looked down on my birth, but now I realize I just want to be on the right path. I hate wasting my life for short-sighted people." He paused, looking directly at his lord. "And you, sir, what do you desire?" Benjamin stood in the glow of the fading light. He didn't look like a politician or a dreamer, but a man who had seen the world and intended to change it. He winked, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "That is a secret." The leisurely days of the Western frontier prisoners, eating and drinking for free in Frosttown, officially came to an end on a crisp autumn morning. Walter stood in the center of the detention area, clad in light armor with a longsword at his waist. His expression was so serious it could freeze a mosquito to death. Behind him stood 20 fully armed Frosttown soldiers, victors of the bloody Battle of Stonefang Pass, their backs ramrod straight, their eyes sharp and oppressive. "Everyone, assemble!" Walter's voice reached every ear with chilling clarity. 163 prisoners, mostly ordinary infantry and light cavalry, formed a crooked line. A month of imprisonment had left them pale, but their strength had recovered. They looked at the night with anxious eyes, wondering if their fate held execution, slavery, or indefinite rot. Lord Benjamin approached then, dressed in simple clothes and accompanied only by Chesvia and 2 guards. "Gentlemen," Benjamin said, his tone deceptively cheerful, "your rest period in Frosttown is over." An uneasy whisper rippled through the crowd. "First, I have some news that may not be good," Benjamin continued. "We contacted the Western frontier regarding your ransom. The reply from Grand Duke Charles states that the troops missing at Stonetooth Pass have been declared completely killed. They do not acknowledge you. They will not pay a single copper shield for your lives." The prisoners turned deathly pale. They were not highborn knights, they were common men, and their master had found it cheaper to call them heroes than to buy them back. "Quiet," Walter roared, and the commotion died instantly. "However," Benjamin said, "Frosttown is willing to give you a choice. First, you will participate in labor. Your task is to repair the road to Stonetooth Pass. You will receive shelter, 3 meals a day, and a reduction in your sentence for good performance. Second, after 5 years of honest work, you will be free. You may leave or stay as official residents. I promise, no one will discriminate against you." His tone suddenly turned ice cold. "Third, if anyone tries to escape. First time, your term is extended by 10 years. The second time, you will be executed. Did you understand everything?" A sparse reply drifted back. Louder, Walter bellowed, "Do you understand?" "Understood," the men shouted in unison. Benjamin turned to his knight. "Walter, oversee the road project, divide them into teams." "Lord, give me half of the people," Chesvia interrupted. Her snow-white hair swayed in the breeze and her voice sounded strangely ethereal. 60 are enough for the road. I will take the rest to cultivate the northern farmland." Benjamin frowned. Why the sudden rush for land reclamation? Chesvia gazed at the northern Greywhisper Mountains, her eyes gleaming with a golden light. "This autumn is colder than any before," she whispered, "and life in the mountains is emanating an aura of unease and fear. To prepare for the impending danger, we must have food." Benjamin scrutinized her. "Chesvia, your voice sounds strange." She blinked and the profound aura vanished instantly. "Really?" she asked, touching her throat. "Maybe my herbal tea was too strong." She rolled her eyes, returning to her usual impatient tone. "I am worried about a cold wave, Benjamin. The animals are fleeing the peaks. If the snow closes the mountains and we lack reserves, there will be trouble." Benjamin nodded slowly. "Very well, Walter, give 80 men to the Ministry of Agriculture." Chesvia perked up immediately, marching toward the line like she was choosing livestock. You, and that tall guy, don't hide, you are all mine." Benjamin watched her go, then looked toward the majestic mountains. The sun was bright and the sky was a deep, peaceful blue, but a shadow of doubt remained. A cold wave, Benjamin tried to recall. The last one he remembered vividly was 5 years ago, back when his adventurer team was trapped in a dwarven fortress for a full month. His memories of that time were a blur of fiery dwarven liquor and the faces of his companions. There was Ella and Calvin bickering daily, Celia trying to mediate, Finn teaching himself martial arts, and Lauren closing ordeals with the dwarves. Then there was Hill constantly writing mysterious letters, and Livia. He felt a pang of shame for how often he subconsciously overlooked her. That month taught him one thing: the power of nature is sometimes more terrifying than a dragon. Shaking his head, Benjamin returned to the present. Beside him, Chesvia was busy selecting laborers from a group of prisoners. "By the way, Chesvia," he asked, "how have you been getting along with Evelyn lately?" Chesvia didn't look up. "Just like that, she probably likes the snacks I make." She described how the usually efficient, stoic Evelyn was secretly obsessed with her roasted nuts and candied petals, often casually passing by to snatch a treat. Benjamin laughed, unable to imagine the serious Evelyn stuffing her face. But then, Chesvia stepped closer, her expert. Eshin shifted into a look of compassionate gentleness, her eyes as warm as melting honey. Suddenly she reached out, cupping Benjamin's face in her cool, herb-scented palms. "You can care more about the people around you," she whispered coaxingly. "Don't carry the burden alone, everyone is actually a good kid." Time froze, the surrounding soldiers and prisoners stared in stunned silence. Even Walter, the serious knight, stood dazed. Then, as if waking from a dream, Chesvia jumped back, her face turning a violent shade of red. "That was a split personality," she stammered wildly. "A side effect of the Nen blade, not me, remember that." She fled toward the prisoners, leaving Benjamin touching his cheek in confusion. Walter approached, his voice heavy with guilt. "Sir, Minister Chesvia paid such a heavy price to save me, these psychological aftereffects, how can I ever repay her?" Benjamin tried to downplay it, but Walter's resolve was ironclad. The knight declared that he would take over the territory's administrative duties so that Benjamin could spend more time comforting Chesvia during her instability. "What kind of help is this?" Benjamin shouted, but Walter was already marching away to begin his new mission. Left alone, Benjamin rubbed his cheek once more, muttering softly, "Side effects." Just when everything in Frosttown seemed to be on track, with prisoners of war laboring on new roads and Walter learning the ropes of government, Sullivan began to think Benjamin had truly lost his mind. While the first steam engine roared in the foundry, a letter arrived from Ella that changed everything. The message was blunt. 100 refugees from the north, pathetic wretches escaping a purification zone, were crowding her borders. Ella, ever impatient and eager to shift blame, demanded a solution immediately. Benjamin, however, simply smiled. To him, this wasn't a crisis. It was an opportunity. Frosttown was desperate for labor. Without people, who would build his roads? Who would buy the houses he planned to construct? A town of 1,000 is a village, but a town of 10,000 is an empire. But housing presented a new headache. Benjamin had perfected a cutting-edge concrete, yet the town lacked bricks. Stone was too slow, and the local clay was being shaped by hand, an inefficient, grueling process. Benjamin had a vision, a steam-powered mud mixer and a mechanical brick press. The problem, the steam engine itself. Benjamin wasn't an engineer, he only had half-remembered science articles from his previous life. The only reason their first machine, Unit 01, even worked was because of Ella's genius. Currently, that single prototype was working day and night in the foundry. Benjamin's brother, Gene, a former serf-turned-junior mechanic, watched the steel monster with shining eyes, begging for more. He saw the future, steam-powered mills, water pumps, and forging hammers. But Ella had treated the first engine like a piece of fine art, not a mass-produced tool. Benjamin realized he had to swallow his pride and head to Ironforge. He sat down to write his reply, his pen flying across the paper. He told Ella he would take every single refugee she had. Then he pivoted, flattering her unparalleled skills while describing his grand plans for new machinery. He needed her to stop making sculptures and start making power. As the ink dried, Benjamin sighed. It was time for another long journey to meet the proud, awkward, and ridiculously talented master of art. He was ready to see what Ironforge had become under her rule, and to turn his blueprints into a revolution. Having decided to journey to Ironforge, Benjamin faced a sudden, pressing question. Who should he take with him? He looked around at his core team, only to find everyone was busy to the point of exhaustion. Walter was the first to be ruled out. Since the Battle of Stonetooth Pass, the champion knight seemed possessed by a double sense of mission. Between training the expanding army and guarding prisoners of war, he had even begun studying government affairs with Suleiman. To make matters worse, a letter arrived from Baron Guise of Blackrock Territory, likely drafted by the more eloquent Mrs. Guise, proposing a joint commune defense exercise. Walter's eyes lit up at the prospect of troop deployment strategies. Trying to drag him away now would be impossible. he would likely cling to Benjamin's leg, begging to stay until the plans were finalized. Sullivan was also out of the question. The administrator had entered a life-burning mode, juggling the demands of 15 different lords. Between trade terms, road construction disputes, and endless negotiations, the dark circles under his eyes were beginning to rival his smoky eye makeup. Taking him away would bring the entire administrative system to a grinding halt. Then there was Chesvia. She was entirely absorbed in preparing for the coming cold wave, managing greenhouses and hardy crops with the help of Benjamin's father, Old Blackwood. Though some whispered that Old Blackwood only held his position because of his son, his natural resilience and talent for farming proved his worth. Benjamin realized he had only two mobile personnel left. First, Evelyn, as his personal secretary and intelligence agent, she was the logical choice to handle the itinerary. Though she served as the eyes and ears of others, her competence was undeniable. Second, Diona, this guard from the south, had one singular mission: to protect Benjamin. An expert in wilderness survival and a powerful bodyguard, he was the perfect companion for a dangerous road. Benjamin summoned them both. Evelyn nodded calmly, already planning the route and suggesting they bring Frosttown specialties like smoked meat and honey-preserved berries as gifts for Lord Ella. Diona simply stretched his shoulders, wondering aloud if the legendary Miss Ella's swordsmanship was as
Good as they said.
While waiting to depart, Benjamin didn't sit idle. He spent his final hours designing a little thing, a devastating upgrade for the heavy ballista captured from Earl Dragonflame. By replacing standard bolts with hollow, wrought iron shells filled with volatile dust crystals, he created a weapon that wouldn't just pierce a target. It would release a catastrophic explosion upon impact. With his team chosen and his defenses prepared, the journey to Ironforge was ready to begin. Dust crystals are a volatile substitute for dynamite, powerful yet plagued by a frustrating flaw. They only explode upon violent impact, making them nearly impossible to trigger by hand. If thrown, they simply bounce off the grass or soil. To solve this, Benjamin has engineered a revolutionary crossbow triggering device. The design is ingenious, a heavy ballista bolt equipped with an inertial firing pin. Upon impact, the pin strikes a dust crystal block with terrifying kinetic energy, trading simple penetration for a devastating explosion. For the phalanx formations of this era, the effect will be nothing short of revolutionary. Benjamin's brother traces the blueprints with thick, calloused fingers. Once dreaming of forging knightly swords, he now mutters about hard steel cores and quenching as he disappears into the roar of the steam-powered foundry. Benjamin watches him go with a chuckle. The old world of plate armor is fading, replaced by the era of the explosive arrowhead. Two letters soon arrive, shifting the tone. The first is from Ella, written in her flamboyant, impatient hand. She agrees to hold the refugees but warns Benjamin not to dawdle, her awkward concern hidden beneath a mask of complaints. She mentions chaos to the north, urging him to be careful on the road. The second letter is far heavier. It is from Celia Windsor. She writes that she has fled the magnificent cage of the capital, refusing to hide while her friends bleed for her ideals. Her words are raw with apology for her past hesitation, promising Benjamin that he will never fight alone again. But it is her closing offer that lingers. She invites him to stand by her side once the throne is reclaimed, occupying the seat closest to the crown. Benjamin stands by his window, looking out over the rising walls of Frosthold. In the capital, he would be a pillar of the kingdom, yet bound by the suffocating politics of the court. Here, in the cold north, he is the architect of a new world.
Which future does he truly desire?
He locks the letters away, his heart already knowing the answer. For now, there is work to be done. He must head to Ironforge, manage the refugees, and prepare for the coming storm. The princess's invitation can wait, at least until the war is won and the dust has settled. In the far north of the kingdom of Windwind, the sky is a heavy gray, pierced by mountains like iron fangs. This is a barren, unruly land, yet it possesses a terrifying advantage: absolute centralized power. Here, the word of Grand Duke Edmund Frost carries more weight than the king's own decrees. High atop a frozen stone watchtower, the Earl of Winterhill, the Grand Duke's most formidable commander, overlooks his gathering army. Wrapped in heavy wolf skins, his breath vanishing into the howling gale, the Earl prepares to execute a secret order: the seizure of Hearthstone. This city is the heart of Ironforge, the kingdom's most vital weapons workshop. To claim it, he has deployed the Winter Mountain Legion, hardy mountain dwellers who prioritize cold steel over flashy heraldry. The Earl's path was nearly blocked by the shrewd Lord Hill of Pearl City, but a fawning letter and generous gifts bought the lady a temporary, fragile peace. Now the Earl's gaze shifts south. A coalition led by Calvin, one of the 7 knights, attempts to hold the border, while Calvin's legendary Griffin Knights strike with deadly aerial precision. They are too few to hold the line forever. The Earl smiles coldly. He has already dispatched an elite infiltration force to slip through the cracks. Their target is Hearthstone City, currently ruled by the young Alpacas. Intelligence suggests she is isolated, struggling against internal mining guilds and possessing a weak military. To the Earl, the city is merely a loaf of bread, waiting to be taken. Meanwhile, inside the black rock walls of Hearthstone's castle, the air smells of burning coal and forged iron. Lady Alpacas is in a state of uncharacteristic panic. The reason: Benjamin is coming. She paces her study, frantically overturning banquet menus and fretting over her reflection. This isn't like receiving the somber Sir Calvin, this is personal. She demands to know Benjamin's tastes, his favorite music, his favorite food. Her old butler, Clement, offers a calm, grounding perspective. Lord Blackwood was not born to the nobility, Missy may find elaborate etiquette annoying. Ella softens, remembering Benjamin's preference for campfires over ballrooms. She regains her haughty mask, declaring he wouldn't dare look down on her hospitality, yet her heart races at the thought of pleasing him. Casting aside tradition, she rushes off to personally inspect his guest room, determined to show him a sincerity that no crown could command. The journey from Frosttown to Ironforge began with a heavy escort. Benjamin traveled with Evelyn, Diona, and a 20-man guard, a necessary precaution for both safety and the management of the refugees he hoped to receive. As they crossed into Silver Creek territory, the roads were impressively smooth, a testament to the diligence of its ruler, Irwin. Benjamin looked out the window with genuine admiration. Irwin certainly didn't cut corners, he remarked to Evelyn. This road alone is of immeasurable value to the region. But the comfort was short-lived. The moment they crossed the border into Ironcast territory, the People's Roads became a nightmare of ruts, potholes, and thick, semi-dry mud. The carriage groaned, its wheels sinking deep into natural traps. Benjamin watched, frowning, as his guards were forced to dismount and heave the heavy vehicle through the muck. In stark contrast, a well-maintained official road ran parallel to the sludge, paved with stone and rammed earth. But this path was a privilege, not a right. Guards stood watch, ready to whip or detain any commoner who dared set foot on the noble stones without a permit. Benjamin's status as a baron granted him passage, but he couldn't ignore the sight of local villagers being detained and their goods confiscated, simply for being poor. The path of the nobles, Benjamin thought grimly, is built on the blood and sweat of the commoners. Seeking to ease the tension, Benjamin produced a bag of honey-soaked berries and salted nuts. The atmosphere softened as Evelyn began to snack, her movements cautious yet steady. Benjamin steered the conversation toward the harsh laws they had just witnessed. Evelyn's voice was calm, yet it carried a weight of history. In the old days, she explained, a commoner on a noble's road risked their very life. It only changed 70 years ago, when the pale goddess issued her divine decree. She looked at him, her gaze piercing. The oracle demanded the abolition of slavery and limited the power of nobles to decide who lives and who dies. The goddess stated that humans possess dignity and are not livestock. Since then, she added with a trace of irony, the power of the nobility has been diminished, at least on the surface. Silence returned to the carriage as the snacks disappeared. Outside, the rigid hierarchy of Ironforge remained etched into the landscape, a world of fire, steel, and the silent, enduring struggle of those beneath the wheels. Ironforge, Hearthstone. It is a colossal fortress of rock, steel, and smoke carved directly into the mountain. As Benjamin's carriage passes through the heavy gates, the atmosphere is thick with the scent of metal and the wary glares of soot-stained miners and blacksmiths. Evelyn leans in, whispering of the palpable tension, a coldness that only dissipates when a familiar figure appears. There stands Alpacas, better known as Ella. She has traded her ornate court gowns for the simple, practical adventuring gear she wore years ago. Though she stands with aristocratic poise, her eyes betray a flicker of nervous anticipation. As Benjamin steps out, he offers a formal, noble bow. Ella tries to maintain a businesslike tone, but her voice climbs an octave as she welcomes him. She quickly dismisses the need for a grand, stuffy banquet, offering instead a private meal, just the two of them. When Benjamin playfully teases her with exaggerated formality, the mask slips. Ella's face twists in mock disgust. "Talk normally," she snaps. "It sounds disgusting." The tension breaks into genuine laughter. For a moment, they aren't lords, they are just the handyman and the girl who used to look after him in the hero's party. Yet the dinner that follows is eerily quiet. In a hall built for hundreds, they sit alone at a long table laden with roasted ibex and thick stews. The silence is heavy, punctuated only by the clink of silver. Ella watches him, wondering why the man who used to fight for every scrap of meat in the wild is now so still. Meanwhile, far to the north, the air is filled with a different kind of silence. On the border of Stone Cliff territory, the wind howls over a battlefield. Calvin, mounted on his hybrid griffin, Azure Blade, carves through northern cavalry with desperate, reckless fury. His sword is a flash of silver in the gloom, but his heart is heavy. His commanders pull him back, noting his mount's bloody wounds and his own fraying composure. It isn't just the endless skirmishes haunting Calvin, it is the rot within. Whispers of betrayal are spreading through his lands, with villagers questioning their loyalty to the princess. Calvin grips his sword, his gaze fixed on the leaden northern sky, waiting for the true storm that is yet to break. The long banquet for two finally came to an end. As the heavy oak doors closed, leaving the spacious hall behind, Benjamin felt it was time to get down to business. However, on the way to the study, Ella seemed absent-minded. Her gaze drifted to the night sky, her fingers fidgeting with her cuffs. Benjamin saw right through her. The young lady was brooding over the simple reception, feeling she had lost face as a host. Benjamin chuckled inwardly, then stopped and spoke with sudden sincerity. "Speaking of which, that meal was really good. I haven't had such a satisfying meal in a long time." Ella paused, her eyes suspicious. "Really?" Benjamin continued, blending nostalgia with helplessness. "The banquets in Silver Creek are a headache. The food is too sweet or just pretty and cold. It is rare to find something as hot and plentiful as what we had today." Ella's expression brightened instantly. "Of course, I personally selected the menu, using only the best ingredients from Ironforge." Benjamin pressed his advantage with a grin. "It's a pity it wasn't made by Miss Ella herself. If I could taste your cooking, I might be moved to tears." "Dream on," Ella laughed, giving him a light kick to the shin. "You're still a long way off, you handyman." The tension broke. They entered the study, a room lined with ancestor portraits and kingdom maps. But as soon as the doors shut, Ella's complaints returned. "By the way, those refugees you asked for, several more batches arrived. There are almost 600 of them now." She tapped the table, frowning. "I've had to house them in the old warehouses. The rations are a huge expense. It's such a hassle." Benjamin's smile vanished. "More than 600. "What's wrong?" Ella asked, noticing his sudden gravity.
"This isn't
"Right, Ella," he whispered. "There are too many people." The air in the room chilled. Benjamin walked to the map on the wall, pointing to the border. "Refugees don't appear out of thin air. 600 people, that is the size of several villages, yet we've heard no news of attacks or relocations." He turned, his gaze sharp. "What does this mean?" Ella stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. The spoiled girl was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp leader. "It means there is something wrong with these refugees. If these were northern spies or soldiers infiltrated into the heart of Ironforge, the consequences would be fatal." "It's a bit like the old days," Benjamin said softly. Ella retorted with a flicker of her old spirit, "Back when you were just a handyman telling corny jokes." "Pretty much," Benjamin laughed, "but now we are dealing with a man-made disaster." Ella nodded and pulled the summoning rope. When her steward, Clement, arrived, her voice was steel. "Seal the warehouse district. No one leaves. Assemble the guards. I want to know who is leading those people. And summon the city defense captain, quickly." The meeting hall was heavy with a somber silence, the flickering firelight casting long, dancing shadows across the stone walls. Only the old butler, Clement, remained at Ella's side. Even the city defense captain had been dismissed, for this was a matter of absolute secrecy. Benjamin looked at the aging servant, then back to Ella with a hint of suspicion. "The only person you trust is Mr. Clement?" he asked. "With a traitor and a military threat looming, isn't the manpower a bit thin?" Ella raised her chin, her voice sharp. He alone is worth more than all of you." Clement bowed gracefully. "Young Master Benjamin, it has been a long time. You have become even more composed." Benjamin offered a wry smile before turning to Evelyn and Diona, who had just entered. "Time is of the essence," Benjamin said, his tone shifting to business. "Tell me your thoughts." Diona spoke first, his southern accent thick in the heavy air. "We believe there are two possibilities. First, Lord Calvin's defenses have been breached, and enemy units are raiding the heart of Stonecliff, driving refugees toward us. If so, Calvin is already in a fierce battle." Evelyn stepped forward, her expression grim. "But the second possibility is more likely. Among the 700 refugees, there are likely northern soldiers in disguise. Their goal is to infiltrate, create chaos, and seize the city gates from within." Clement's sharp eyes clouded with worry. "I pray for the first scenario," he whispered. "At least then the enemy is outside the walls." Ella remained silent, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. Her shoulders trembled, not with fear but with a brewing, volcanic rage. "Ella," Benjamin called softly. She raised her head, her azure eyes burning. "I just confirmed something with the captain," she saw. Her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "2 days ago, while I was busy preparing for your arrival, the mining guild secretly released over 200 strong refugees into the city without my permission. They claimed they were recruiting miners." She slammed her hand on the table. "Now only the elderly and the weak remain in the camps. Who are these men they brought inside?" The mining guild, the oldest, most stubborn power in Ironforge, had moved beyond mere political disagreement. This was a naked challenge to her authority. It was sabotage. "I will help you, Ella," Benjamin promised, his voice cold. "Whether it is clearing out spies or reorganizing your territory, we must strike hard." The plan was set. Under the guise of a winter supply distribution, the city guards and Diona's men would round up the newcomers into the old smelting plant. Simultaneously, the west gate would be locked down. Ella took a deep breath, her voice returning to a chilling calm. "Clement, pass on the orders, block the gates, arrest the guards, gather every new face in the city." She looked at Benjamin, her resolve absolute. "This is no longer a guild struggle, this is war." Wudan sat in his spacious office overlooking the Furnace Heart City Square, his face so gloomy it could drip water. He gripped an urgent report, his knuckles white. The city defense forces, Ella Pacas's forces, had entered the core mining area without permission. Even worse, they were marching directly toward his headquarters. "That arrogant little brat!" Wudan slammed the report onto his obsidian-inlaid table with a dull, heavy thud. To him, Ella was merely a child playing at being a lord. He stood by the window, watching his guild guards gather below. For decades, the mining guild had been the true power in Ironforge, outlasting every noble family sent by the crown. They were the masters of the mines, until Ella arrived. With her new Seven Knights title and her aggressive new policies, she had finally pushed the guild too far. Wudan had already made his move, secretly allowing northern soldiers, disguised as refugees, into the city. Whether the North won the civil war or the crown struggled to maintain order, Wudan saw only profit. He expected a long, drawn-out political battle, but he never expected Ella to strike this fast. A flash of unease crossed his mind, but he quickly suppressed it. He straightened his magnificent robes, embroidered with the gold-threaded pickaxe of his office, and prepared to face her. Meanwhile, the rhythmic, heavy thud of boots echoed against the stone path. Ella Pacas walked at the front of her unit, her hair tied back, her leather armor gleaming in the dusk. Half a step behind her was Benjamin Blackwood. "In Hearth City," Benjamin whispered, "who hates the guild? Who can we win over?" Ella didn't hesitate. "The workshop masters. The guild exploits them by monopolizing raw materials. I've already sent my trusted mess. Endures to secure their loyalty." Benjamin nodded, impressed by her decisiveness. "When we meet the guild master," he cautioned, "don't lose your temper, act as if you have everything under control." Ella's lips curled into a sarcastic smile. "Does that really require a performance?" she asked, her chin tilted with innate arrogance. They turned the corner. Ahead stood the massive stone headquarters of the mining guild, guarded by dozens of men with spears and shields. Ella didn't slow down, she didn't hesitate. She marched straight toward the gate, ready to take back her city. The atmosphere in front of the guild headquarters was thick with tension. the leader of the guards stepped forward, forcing himself to block Ella's path. "Lord Pakaz," he stammered, "may I ask what urgent matter brings you here? According to procedure, you need to give prior notice." "Procedure?" Ella interrupted, her voice cutting like a blade. She didn't even look at him. "Is this how Wooden taught you to speak to your lord?" Before she could finish, her personal guards pounced like wolves. Without drawing their swords, they used ironclad shoulders and shields to brutally shove the guild guards aside. The formation shattered, leaving the men staggered and humiliated. Ella walked straight through the gaping, maw-like doorway, leaving behind a cold command: "Stand outside. No one is to enter or leave without my permission." Benjamin followed closely, with Evelyn trailing like a shadow and the old butler, Clement, bringing up the rear. Inside, the headquarters felt like a mountain's heart, carved from unpolished boulders and supported by massive logs. The air smelled of ancient dust, and the walls glowed with the steady, yellow light of fluorite lamps. As they moved deeper, the guild's stewards and accountants stopped their work. They didn't speak, they simply watched. Their silent, heavy gazes followed the intruders like a physical weight. Benjamin leaned in, whispering a dry joke to Ella. "I say, did you really set up that development fund to help these miners? These people don't seem to welcome their benevolent lord very much." Ella's face darkened. "A bunch of ungrateful wretches," she hissed. Evelyn spoke up, her voice just loud enough for the others to hear. "When you implemented these policies, Lady Ella, did you personally appear before the miners? Did they know these changes came from you?" Clement sighed, looking helpless. "The mistress does not like direct contact with miners. She left the implementation entirely to the guild management." Benjamin understood immediately. The money was spent, the good deed was done, but the guild had stolen all the credit. They ascended the stone steps to the top floor, where the air grew even more hostile. Men stood with hands resting on daggers and axes. At the end of the platform stood a heavy oak door. Ella didn't knock, she didn't ask. She simply lifted her leg and bang. The door slammed against the inner wall. Inside sat Wooden, the guild president. He was an elderly man of robust build, sitting calmly behind a massive desk. 8 elite guards in fine chainmail stood behind him, their eyes sharp and seasoned. Ella marched to the desk, leaning forward to stare him down. "President Wooden, I need an explanation. Why did you bypass my orders and bring in unidentified refugees? Where are they?" Wooden didn't flinch. He stood slowly and offered a shallow bow. "Lord Pakaz, what brings you here?" He spoke as if he hadn't heard her question. "There must be a misunderstanding. As for those poor refugees, the North is in turmoil. I recruited them to solve our manpower shortage. It was all for the sake of production." He gestured to a stack of documents. "The contracts and records are all here. Everything is compliant." Wooden's tone was calm, almost patronizing. "Lord Pakaz, I admire your ambition, but Ironforge is a place of deep traditions. A lord must cooperate with the guilds and respect the old ways. Confrontation," he paused, his eyes narrowing, "will benefit no one." Wu Dan's pretentious advice was like hot oil poured onto Ella, a volcano on the verge of eruption. "Absurd!" she roared, her voice trembling with rage. She leaned across the table, demanding to know why the dignity of the Parkas family was being traded for hypocritical traditions and dangerous, unidentified outsiders. The room's temperature seemed to rise with her fury. Clement stepped forward, his thumb pressing the hilt of his sword, a glint of cold steel appearing at the scabbard. Seeing the powder keg about to explode, Wu Dan put on a heartbroken expression. "My lord, please, calm down." He raised his hands, stammering about oversight and promising an investigation that would take, conveniently, a few days to bring the truth to light. Benjamin watched silently. He noticed Wu Dan's eyes darting toward the high window. The old man was stalling, waiting for reinforcements. Just as Ella prepared to lash out again, Benjamin pressed a steadying hand onto her shoulder. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Guildmaster Wu Dan, you should at least understand what overstepping means." Benjamin's gaze was icy. He reminded the old man that by the kingdom's laws, Ella could strip him of everything. When Wu Dan sneered, questioning Benjamin's right to speak, Evelyn's voice rang out, "Baron of Frosttown, Benjamin Blackwood." Benjamin continued, invoking the authority of Princess Celia. "As for the reinforcements you're waiting for, forget it. You aren't leaving this room." Panic finally cracked Wu Dan's facade. "Attack!" he shrieked. "Take down these madmen." 8 elite guards lunged forward, but they never reached their targets. A deep, scorching hum vibrated through the air. It wasn't a sound, it was a soul-crushing heat. The lead guard froze as his steel axe turned dark red, softening and melting into liquid fire that scalded his flesh. Then came the screams. The guards' chainmail turned red-hot, clinging to their skin like molten wax. They became living torches, collapsing into charred, twisted remains. Benjamin turned to Ella. She was transformed. Her hair glowed with the radiance of molten lava, a flowing, fiery golden red. She stepped toward the trembling Wu Dan, her eyes shimmering like two small suns. "This is neither a request nor a notification," Ella whispered, her voice as heavy as a forge's hammer. "This is an order. Tell me everything." She raised her hand, and the metal buttons on Wu Dan's clothes began to glow with a lethal, rising heat. Benjamin may have worried about Ella's management style, fearing she was too easily manipulated, but he never once feared for her safety. The reason was simple. Ella Parkas had the power to flip a table, literally. Even the stubborn Calvin, after thoroughly angering her, would never dare flaunt his armor in her presence. He knew all too well that a meticulously crafted suit of plate could become a scorching, deadly iron coffin in a heartbeat. In the tense silence of the headquarters, Ella gave the traitorous Wooden one final chance to confess, but just as he stammered out the first name. *boom. A massive explosion rocked the building, followed by a second and a third. Dust rained from the ceiling as the very mountain trembled. From outside, the sounds of slaughter and terrified screams erupted. A blood-stained guard staggered onto the platform, his voice cracking with urgency. "My lord, the workshops and warehouses are ablaze. The mining guild's armed guards are gathering in massive numbers. They are inciting a riot." The radical faction and northern infiltrators had been pushed too far. They were moving to seize the city in one fell swoop. Benjamin looked out the window at the horizon, now a bruised, angry red. "The losses will be substantial," he murmured. "I don't care," Ella's voice rang out behind him, sharp and defiant. "Out with the old, in with the new. If we must burn away these cancerous growths to save the heart of this city, then let it burn." Benjamin turned to his aide, Evelyn. "Do you have interrogation experience?" Evelyn nodded, her expression as cold as stone. "Within my area of expertise, my lord." "Good, find out their plans, their contacts, and their hiding places, by any means necessary." As Evelyn approached the sobbing Wooden with a roll of thin rope and long, gleaming needles, Benjamin and Ella strode toward the exit. But as they stepped onto the outer platform, they stopped dead. The stone steps were crowded with guild leaders and thugs, their eyes burning with naked hostility. They had been waiting. Benjamin slowly drew his longsword, a perfect, custom blade, from his brother. "Be careful," he whispered to Ella. "Don't damage my sword in the crossfire." Ella snorted, drawing a rapier made of translucent, glowing crystal. "Dawn. Worry," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "It won't get in your way at all." Side by side, they faced the mob. Ella's gaze swept over the traitors, her voice carrying the weight of ancient law. "In accordance with the kingdom's lordship law, anyone who draws a weapon against their lord is a rebel." She pointed her crystal tip at the foremost thug. "And you have pointed your swords at the rightful owner of this land." She delivered the final verdict. "This crime is punishable by death." Diona stood before the burning warehouse, the scorching heat of high-quality charcoal biting into his soot-covered face. He was a step too late. The orange flames greedily licked the night sky, billowing thick, pungent smoke over the chaotic streets of Hearthstone. At his feet lay 8 corpses. They wore the tattered rags of refugees, but their hands were calloused from years of wielding steel. Diona kicked a short axe away from a dead hand, a sneer curling his lip. "A rat from the north," he muttered, "no matter what skin it wears, will never become a house cat." These were no desperate migrants. They were a systematic sabotage team, and though Diona's dual pistols had ended them in heartbeats, the fire was now beyond control. Around him, the city was dissolving into a panicked herd of miners and craftsmen. Diona didn't hesitate. He turned to the nearby city defense leaders, his voice cutting through the roar of the blaze. "Listen, I am acting on the will of Lord Ella. Abandon the pursuit of lone arsonists. Your primary task is order." He pointed toward the central square. "Gather every civilian there, anyone who disobeys, anyone who incites the crowd. Take them down. If they resist, kill them without mercy." As the guards scrambled to obey, Diona waved his own men forward. To the city gate now. One guard hesitated. Sir, shouldn't we stay here? If the enemy wants this city, Diona replied, his pace quickening, the gate is the key. As he rushed through the smoke, a flicker of worry crossed his mind. Was Lady Ella safe? Was the old steward all right? He shook the thoughts away. If he held the gate, he could face the Lord's judgment later if he failed. There would be no later. Meanwhile, 5 miles away, an army of 2,000 waited in the shadows of a silent valley. These were not northern invaders, but the noble alliance of Ironforge, old families stripped of power, their resentment finally ignited into treason. The interim commander, a gray-haired viscount, watched the distant glow of the burning city. A scout rushed to his side, breathless. "My lord, the Griffin Knights have detected us. The North demands we strike now." The viscount looked at his men, his voice a hoarse roar that echoed off the valley walls. "Warriors of Ironforge, tonight there is no turning back. Reclaim your glory, or perish on the land of your ancestors." He raised his blade, the steel glinting in the moonlight. "Attack."
The
Nee's intricate passageways vomited a sea of thugs, overseers, and desperate criminals. Armed with pickaxes and makeshift bows, they swarmed the platform, completely blocking the path to the offices. Benjamin parried a heavy pickaxe, ducking a machete before thrusting his blade through a thug's throat. "There are just too many of them," he gasped. "Ella, what did you do to be so disliked?" "Shut up, I am not disliked," Ella retorted. As a spear lunged for her ribs, she spread her fingers. The metal tip turned a glowing, dark red, softening into useless slag. With a flash of her crystal rapier, she finished the horrified attacker. Benjamin's style was one of pure pragmatism. He lacked the elegance of a knight, but his sword danced with lethal precision, slicing through gaps, parrying heavy blows, and striking vital points. Beside him, Ella was a whirlwind of heat. Any iron weapon that entered her melting field twisted into molten scrap, scalding the attackers who held them. Together, they were a wall of death, leaving a circle of smoldering debris and silent corpses. But a venomous snake waited in the shadows. Benjamin spotted a footprint appearing in fresh blood, moving rapidly toward Ella's back. There was no figure, no sound. "Ella, to the left!" Benjamin lunged, his sword clashing against thin air with a piercing asterisk clang. Sparks flew from an invisible wall. A blue-lit blade flickered into existence for a heartbeat before vanishing. "A chosen one of the goddess of concealment," Benjamin roared. Suddenly, a faint whistle cut the air toward Benjamin's neck. He dived face first to the floor, but he was wide open for a follow-up. Just then, a decorated blade intercepted the fatal strike. "Please leave this unseen guest to this old servant," Clement murmured. The elderly steward moved with terrifying calm, sensing ripples in the air and parrying invisible strikes with his ceremonial sword. Inside the office, the door cracked open. "My lady," Evelyn called out calmly, "the interrogation is over. Wooden has confessed everything." "Clement, Ella, we're leaving." Benjamin smashed a stone window with his sword hilt. He grabbed the prisoner, Wooden, by the collar. "Jump." They plummeted from the building. Benjamin and Evelyn braced against the stone walls to slow their descent, but the obese Wooden hit a wooden scaffold with a sickening *crack* before falling unconscious. They landed in the mud of the square, but there was no relief. Before them, Ella's personal guards were surrounded, trapped in a desperate, bloody circle against the guild's massive gates. Ella and Clement followed closely behind, leaping from the shattered window into the chaos below. As soon as they landed, Clement's voice dropped to a wary whisper. "Young Master Benjamin, that unseen guest has also come down." Benjamin's eyes locked onto Wu Dan, whose broken body lay crumpled on the dirt. A sudden, reckless idea took hold. "Hey, your master is here, Benya." Min roared into the empty air. He seized Wu Dan's blood-stained belt, muscles tensing, and with a primal grunt, he hurled the man like a heavy sandbag toward a pile of debris. As the body arched through the air, Evelyn acted. Whoosh, 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 4 throwing knives flashed from her hands, aimed to seal off the landing zone. But then ding, ding, the blades struck an invisible barrier, sparking against thin air as ripples spread like water. Clement moved like a bolt of lightning. He covered 10 steps in a heartbeat, thrusting his sword into the center of the distortion. The sound of steel-piercing flesh echoed through the square. A muffled groan followed, and the air flickered like a dying image until a man in grayish-brown leather armor materialized, skewered through the chest. Clement didn't hesitate, he twisted the blade and ripped it free. The assassin collapsed, blood gushing as his life faded. Evelyn searched the body quickly, finding only poisons and tools of northern craftsmanship. "No emblems, my lord," she reported. Benjamin shrugged, parrying a thug's blow. "It's all right, our guild leader will tell us everything." Evelyn relayed Wu Dan's earlier confession. A rebel army of former nobles had gathered outside, plotting with northern infiltrators to seize the city gates. Hearing this, Ella's voice trembled with a mix of rage and betrayal. "Those trash, why would they betray us?" "All right, Ella," Benjamin interrupted, his tone mimicking Evelyn's usual sternness. "Now is not the time to complain, you have work to do." Spurred by his words, Ella turned to her elite guards. "Warriors of House Parkas, follow me, crush these scum." She became a whirlwind of fire and steel, her crystal rapier shattering enemy weapons as her guards formed a deadly wedge behind her. Meanwhile, 100 miles away, the war at Stonecliff territory raged. Arrows blotted out the sun as Calvin landed his griffin, his breath heavy behind his visor. His deputy delivered the grim news: Ironforge was falling to rebellion. Calvin let out a bitter, absurd sneer. "Alpacas, what a joke." The deputy suggested sending the Griffin Knights to reinforce her, but Calvin's voice turned ice cold. "Reinforcements, and leave our own walls defenseless against the Winter Mountain Legion? This is a trap, a diversion." He stood frozen, torn between the honor of a knight and the duty of a lord. To save a comrade or to protect his people? Cold sweat soaked his shirt as the weight of an impossible choice pressed down upon him. By the time Benjamin and Ella reached the city gate, the air was thick with the deafening roar of battle. Inside the narrow passageway, Diona and a squad of Ironborn defenders were locked in a desperate struggle against northern infiltrators, saboteurs disguised as refugees who had launched a surprise strike to seize the gates. Diona, ever the veteran, had reacted with lightning speed. He utilized the cramped terrain to form a wall of spears and shields, trapping the unarmored rebels in a deadly bottleneck. As Benjamin and Ella arrived, they flanked the enemy from both sides. Ella's terrifying melting field rendered the rebels' metal weapons useless in an instant. And amid shrill screams, the infiltration was crushed. "Well done, Diona," Benjamin shouted, clapping the soldier on the shoulder. He turned to Ella with a smile, but her expression remained grave. She offered no jokes. Instead, she leaped onto the city wall, her voice ringing out with iron authority. "First and second crossbow teams to the walls, push the catapults to the firing ports. I want every traitor who dares touch Hearthstone to never return." Benjamin climbed the battlements to join her, but as he looked out, his breath hitched. On the fields below, a massive, dark ocean of thousands of soldiers stretched toward the horizon, their torches turning the pre-dawn sky a bruised red. This was no peasant mob, this was a disciplined private army. "Can we hold?" Benjamin asked, his voice tight. Evelyn and Diona nodded. The terrain was steep, the walls were strong, and the enemy's numbers were neutralized by the narrow approach. It was a medium difficulty siege, or so they thought. Suddenly, boom! An earth-shattering roar erupted. The very stone beneath their feet shuddered violently. A shockwave of heat and debris slammed into Benjamin, leaving his ears ringing and his vision dark. As Evelyn caught him, she pointed a trembling finger toward the enemy ranks. There, a massive, monstrous ballista was being reloaded. It wasn't firing bolts. It was launching barrels of volatile dust crystals. "They're using crystals as artillery," Benjamin whispered in horror. Before he could even process the sight, a second explosion ripped through the night. A section of the parapet and the men standing upon it vanished in a plume of fire and blood. Panic began to ripple through the defenders. Benjamin stared at the demon-like weapon outside the walls, licking his chapped lips. The difficulty of this battle had just jumped from medium to lethal. Benjamin watched the terrifying ballista outside the city roar once more, carving new wounds into the stone. His heart sank. The city's trebuchets were useless, huffing and puffing as they hurled stones that landed blindly, missing the rebel vanguard entirely. To Benjamin, using these medieval weapons against a precise target was like swinging a battering ram at a needle. The defenders were mere sandbags, taking a one-sided beating that shattered their morale. Outside, the rebel soldiers jeered, mocking the city's incompetence. Anger surged through Benjamin. He turned sharply to Ella, the Ironforge lady, who was frantically directing soldiers to patch the walls with sandbags. "Ella," he shouted, "take me to the nearest ballista, quickly." Ella hesitated, confused. You want to use a ballista, the accuracy. If the catapults can't hit it, then snipe it. Benjamin interrupted. That weapon is stationary on flat ground. This is our only opportunity. Diona stepped forward, chest puffed with pride. Lady Ella, our lord is the best shot in the entire western frontier. Benjamin had a natural, almost uncanny talent for aiming. Whether it was a bow or a heavy winch, he understood the mechanics of trajectory. Seeing the resolve in his eyes, Ella gritted her teeth. Come with me. They crouched low, sprinting through rubble and dust until they reached a heavy ballista. Get out of the way, Benjamin ordered the sweating soldiers. He stepped onto the platform, his hands finding the cold winch with a sense of grim familiarity. He squinted through the wooden sight, calculating distance, wind, and angle in his mind. 3 marks left, 2 marks up, hold steady, he muttered, then he slammed the trigger. The heavy bolt whistled through the air, slamming into the dirt just 2 meters from the enemy target. A test shot, Benjamin whispered, his eyes lighting up. He knew exactly how to correct his aim. Quick, reload, adjust half a mark to the right. But the enemy would not give him a second chance. Careful, Evelyn's voice screamed in his ear. She lunged, yanking Benjamin off the platform just as a massive explosion rocked the wall. A violent shockwave of heat and metal engulfed the ballista, turning it into twisted wreckage. Benjamin lay in the dust, ears ringing, heart hammering against his ribs. He had nearly been blown to pieces. Ella rushed over, her face a mask of fury and terror. You idiot, she screamed, pinching his arm. You almost died. She turned to her men, shouting for them to take cover, swearing the mountain stone of Hearth City would hold. But as she spoke, from the darkness outside, came the chilling creak of the enemy winch turning once again. The city walls of Hearthheart shook under a relentless bombardment. Benjamin, a dignified time traveler from the modern world, huddled behind a reinforced bunker, coughing as dust and debris rained down upon him. He felt a stinging sense of absurdity. He had tried to introduce modern firing pins, only to realize the local nobility had simply bypassed engineering by strapping expensive dust crystals to giant crossbows. He was being outgunned by the Middle Ages. Suddenly, the roar of the engines ceased. Seizing this golden moment of silence, Lady Ella Pacas did the unthinkable. Accompanied only by Clement and a few followers, she marched directly into the heart of the artisan community. Before the weary, soot-covered craftsmen, Ella stood tall. Her voice was steady, carrying a weight that silenced the courtyard. I apologize, she began, for being too arrogant and too lazy. She confessed to neglecting the very people who were the iron backbone of her realm, admitting she had misplaced her trust in greedy guilds while ignoring the sweat and toil of the forge. I beg you, she pleaded, her voice rising with a newfound sincerity. Join me, not for a lord but for your workshops, your families, and this land of iron and fire. Her honesty acted like a spark in a vat of oil. The craftsmen, moved by her humility, pledged their total support. Within the hour, the city's rear was secured, and a fresh stream of high-quality steel and armor flowed toward the battlements. But the threat remained. Back at the command post, Ella's eyes flashed with a dangerous resolve. I'm leaving the city, she declared. Her plan was a suicide mission: sneak through the mine tunnels and use a meltdown command to slag the enemy's crossbows into molten scrap. Benjamin erupted in protest. You're throwing a piece of meat into a pack of wolves, he shouted. They argued like fighting cocks, Benjamin insisting on logic while Ella demanded action. Do you even know how they're making those bolts explode? Benjamin scoffed, explaining the physics of sealed pressure and dust crystals. Ella's anger vanished, replaced by a sharp, knowing glint. If we had dust crystals, she asked softly, could you make something better? Benjamin laughed. Give me the materials and I'll build a launcher that puts theirs to shame. He paused, his eyes widening as a realization hit him. Wait, you have dust crystals. Ella simply tilted her chin up, a look of quiet superiority on her face. Ironforge wasn't just famous for its iron, and Benjamin had finally realized why. Under Ella's sharp threat of being used as furnace fuel, Benjamin drains his modern brain to sketch a weapon. The result? A crude, cylindrical metal shell packed with unstable dust crystals and a primitive firing pin. He calls it a masterpiece. It looks more like an exploding metal cigar. That's it, Benjamin asks, embarrassed. Ella snatches the blueprints, noting that simplicity has merit before dragging him to the castle basement. There, Benjamin's modern safety instincts scream. Open wooden crates overflow with raw dust crystals glowing like solidified explosive honey. When Ella casually tosses a fist-sized crystal at him, Benjamin dives for cover in a perfect air raid drill maneuver. "It won't explode unless you smash it with a heavy hammer," Ella scoffs, mocking his cowardice. She explains that these high-risk explosives were once mere collector's items or a miner's last resort. However, she admits Benjamin's design, ramming a pin into them, is a different story. Using her psychic blade magic, Ella effortlessly melts and shapes wrought iron into the necessary components. Benjamin and the craftsmen then assemble the bolts with agonizing care, padding the crystals with cork and hemp. By nightfall, 20 dust crystal bolts are ready. On the battlements, the atmosphere is suffocating. Benjamin prepares a heavy ballista while Evelyn, using her keen night vision, scouts from a ruined watchtower. She spots the enemy's hidden siege engine 480 paces out. "Load fire," Benjamin commands TH. E-ballista groans, launching the heavy bolt into the void. Seconds later, boom, a brilliant orange fireball erupts in the distance. "Did you hit it?" Ella demands. Evelyn reports a miss 20 paces short. The enemy is shaken, but their weapon remains intact. As Ella begins to berate his aim, Benjamin cuts her off. "That was a calibration shot. I have the pattern now." Suddenly, a retaliatory blast from the rebels shatters the stone where they just stood. They narrowly escape the shockwave. "They're blind at night, too," Benjamin grins, his adrenaline surging like he's back in a video game. He repositioned the crew, his eyes locked on the darkness. A sniping duel then, let's see whose package arrives first. The continuous explosions beat a chaotic rhythm through the long, cruel night. It began with the heavy roar of giant crossbows, answered by the sharp booms of city defenses. But as dawn approached, the fire thinned to a low growl, leaving the Rebel Alliance camp outside Hearthstone in a silent, viscous panic. Inside the command tent, the old Viscount paced like a trapped bear. He slammed his fist onto a map cluttered with empty wine glasses and useless markers. "Why?" he bellowed, his voice trembling with suspicion. "Those exploding bolts were supposed to be our secret weapon. Did the Northern craftsmen switch sides overnight, or have we been sold out?" A portly baron stammered a terrifying thought. "Could we be bait? Is Prince Alcia using us as pawns to force a surrender?" "Shut up," the Viscount roared, shoving the man toward the exit. "Get out before I tie you to a battering ram." As the baron scrambled away, a grim silence fell. The nobles were paralyzed by a new report. 2 precious dust crystal crossbows had been reduced to charcoal by the city's uncanny accuracy. Only one remained, and their stockpile of expensive bolts had melted away to fewer than 6. They were trapped. To retreat was death, to fail was to lose their heads to the prince. The Viscount straightened his back, forcing a mask of resolve. He stepped outside and addressed the trembling crowd. "I do not understand the fear," he lied, his voice hoarse. "I remember the old wars, the glory. We have 2,000 men against their 1,000. The advantage is ours." A few young nobles cheered, but the veterans saw the desperation in his eyes. Suddenly, a mud-stained messenger collapsed at the Viscount's feet. "Your Excellency, the men are scattering, entire groups are deserting. The officers can't stop them." "Nonsense," the Viscount screamed, seizing the man's collar. "The battle hasn't even begun." "Look at the sky," the messenger shrieked, pointing upward. "Look for yourself." The Viscount stumbled into the open air. The morning sun pierced the clouds, revealing several black dots circling in elegant, deadly arcs. They emitted a deep, mechanical whistle, not the cry of a bird. The Viscount's anger vanished, replaced by a bone-chilling terror as he realized the truth. Those were not birds, they were griffins. "Am I seeing things? That flying in the sky is a griffin." Benjamin lay atop the stone walls of Hearthheart, staring in disbelief. Enormous figures swirled and swooped through the clouds like the Grim Reaper's scythe. In this world, griffins were rare, yet here they were, putting on a live demonstration of aerial superiority. Their deafening roars alone plunged the Rebel Alliance below into hysterical chaos. "That's Calvin's Griffin Knight," Ella's voice rang out, sharp with displeasure. The Lady of Ironforge stood beside Benjamin, her face twisted in a pout. She had survived the bombardment and secured the victory, only for these kill-stealers to drop from the sky and snatch the limelight. "Out of the city," Ella commanded, drawing her crystal rapier with a metallic ***. "Don't let those nobles get away." The city gates creaked open. The cleanup was swift. Under the dual pressure of the circling griffins and Ella's vengeful garrison, the rebels surrendered in droves. As the dust settled, an exceptionally large griffin, its feathers shimmering like dark gold, landed heavily on the open ground. A knight in polished, dark gray plate armor leaped down. He moved with a fluid, lethal grace, carrying a heavy lance that gleamed coldly in the morning light. Ella crossed her arms, snorting at the knight's dramatic entrance. Benjamin, however, stepped forward. "Calvin," he ventured. "No," the knight's voice echoed from behind a metal visor. "The commander is at the front lines. He ordered me to reinforce Hearthheart." Ella couldn't help herself. "Support," she spat sarcastically. "You timed it perfectly to claim the results." Benjamin quickly tugged at her arm guard, whispering for her to be silent. He turned back to the knight with a sincere smile. "Please, ignore her. Your arrival was like sunlight tearing through the clouds. Hearthheart will remember this." The knight's gaze lingered on Benjamin. "Lord Blackwood, I appreciate the kindness, but we must return to the front immediately." "You recognize me?" Benjamin asked, surprised. "The commander has mentioned you," the knight replied cryptically. As the warrior turned to remount his beast, Benjamin felt a sudden, sharp impulse. "Wait," he called out. How has Calvin been?" The knight paused. "He is pushing himself too hard." Benjamin took a deep breath. The memories of their time in the heroic squad, the inequality, the distance surfaced in his mind. He looked the knight in the eye, his voice becoming clear and forceful. "Then pass a message to him," Benjamin said, his determination hardening. "Tell him to listen carefully. Tell him I, Benjamin, have caught up." The knight nodded solemnly, climbed into his saddle, and took to the sky, leaving Benjamin standing firm on the soil of a city he had helped save. The rebel airships faded into indistinguishable dots on the horizon, disappearing into the light of the rising sun. Behind them, they left a ravaged camp and a sea of terrified prisoners. Ella kicked a charred tent fragment, her eyes narrowing as she turned to Benjamin. "Hey, handyman," she began, her voice tinged with a mix of confusion and annoyance. "What did you mean by catching up back there? We've been traveling together this whole time. I didn't see you falling behind because of your bad legs." Benjamin withdrew his gaze from the sky, a pleasant smile playing at the corners of his lips. "It wasn't about walking speed, Ella," he explained, stepping toward the fortress of Hearthheart. "It was an expression of intention. I won't and shouldn't always be inferior to others. My starting point was as low as a rug on the floor, but now I've started." He glanced back at her, deliberately quickening his pace. "Haven't you noticed, the way I talk to you now, the esteemed lady of the Paka's family, is a little different than before?" Ella jogged a few steps to keep up, snorting irritably. "Your verbal skills are even more annoying than before. Wait for me. I'm your ally now, not just a travel companion." Hours later, the scene shifted to the heavy oak tables of the Lord's castle. Ella sat in the main seat, irritably pounding the wood. "Sometimes," she complained to her exhausted confidants and Benjamin, "the cleanup is 100 times more troublesome than the war itself." Her eyes blazed with fury as she discussed the rebellious nobles. "These parasites, not a single one will escape. It will be a complete purge," but the fury soon turned to a headache. With the nobles gone, the mines and farms were leaderless, and Ella lacked the administrators to run them. She turned an expectant gaze toward Benjamin. "How does Frosttown handle this? Do you have some quick start management training method?" Benjamin shrugged honestly. "If I did, I wouldn't be working myself to the bone, but—" he leaned forward, his tone turning serious. "I can offer some ideas. First, appease the people. Issue a proclamation immediately. Tell them the nobles will be tried, but the ordinary citizens are safe. They need stability." Ella nodded, signaling a clerk to write. "Second," Benjamin continued, "the mining guilds, do not abolish it." Ella's eyes flashed. "What, that lair of parasites?" "Listen," Benjamin urged, "keep the shell but replace the core. You take direct control. It is easier to cleanse a system from within than to build a new one while the lifeblood of your city is at stake." After a long silence, Ella reluctantly agreed. "Fine, for your sake, we will hang the traitors and fill the vacancies with loyal craftsmen." As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, the group moved to a small side room for a simple meal of dry bread, bacon stew, and wine. Ella watched Benjamin eat with relish, her own nerves finally beginning to settle. "Honestly, Ella," Benjamin said, swirling his wine, 7 years ago, I was worrying about a single bite of bread. Now I'm sitting in a castle discussing the reform of guilds. Life is amazing. Ella snorted, though her expression softened. What, missing your days selling radishes? It's too late to regret it now, handyman, you're on our ship. Regret? Benjamin laughed, looking out at the horizon. Never, the past is like smoke, I only feel that now. Countless paths lie before me. Night finally enveloped Hearthstone completely. Guided by castle servants, Benjamin walked through the dim corridors until he stood before a magnificent wooden door. He hesitated, then knocked. Come in, Ella's voice called from within. Benjamin entered her bedroom, a space surprisingly modest save for an expensive dressing table. Ella sat behind her desk in a thick white wool robe, her damp hair draped over her shoulders. She looked up from a document, gesturing toward a chair by the fireplace. Sit, she said, stretching her bare feet toward the warmth. Finally, some quiet now. What is so urgent that you've come to my bedroom? If it's to complain about the wine, I'll have you thrown out. Benjamin leaned forward, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. Ella, do you remember why I came here? It wasn't for the rebellion, it was for the work of art, the steam engine. It is a standardized, replicable power that doesn't rely on muscle. Think of the possibilities. He painted a vision of a new world, automatic mills, water pumps, and machines that could change everything. Ella listened intently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she spoke softly. It sounds wonderful, Benjamin, almost unreal. If even half of this were true, Ironhold would be transformed. She reached out her hand, palm up. So, where are the blueprints? The room fell silent save for the crackling charcoal. Benjamin's excitement vanished, replaced by a sheepish grin. He placed his hands dramatically over his heart. The blueprints, they are not on parchment, my dear Ella, they are here in our hearts. Ella stared at him, a look of genuine concern crossed her face. Your heart has grown a blueprint. Should I call a doctor or a priest? Okay, Benjamin slumped, his mysterious facade crumbling. The truth is, I only know the principles. Steam drives the piston drives the rod. I have the inspiration, but the specific dimensions, the exact materials, that you'll have to figure out. Ella crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. But the first machine you built was so detailed, you even marked the bolt threads. Benjamin looked away guiltily. He couldn't explain that he only remembered those details because of a grueling university project from his previous life. To her, he simply said, that was a beautiful accident, a gift from the goddess. He stood up, waving his arms with renewed passion. Ella, this is the land of craftsmen. Your artisans have the skill, they only lack the spark. I provide the seed, I will grow the harvest. Ella remained silent for 10 long seconds. Finally, she spoke his name with icy clarity. Benjamin Blackwood, I am now certain you have gone mad. Shall I fetch the medicine for your delusions, or should we start with the priest? The morning after their debate over steam engines, Ella and Benjamin met over bowls of hot oatmeal and honey. Despite her skepticism the night before, Ella stirred her porridge thoughtfully. Those imaginative sketches of yours, she began casually, I'll show them to the masters in the workshop. Who knows, perhaps they can glean something useful from your crooked lines. But the time for theory had passed. Hearthheart was safe, the rebels had fallen, and the gallows awaited the traitors. Now came the rewards. Ella leaned back, her gaze magnanimous. Tell me, Benjamin, what do you want, gold or technology? Just don't ask for the sword by my bedside, anything else is negotiable. Benjamin set down his glass, his expression sharpening. I want more than a temporary partnership. I want a bond where we share both prosperity and adversity. Whether the threat comes from the north, the west, or the capital, I want us to stand firmly behind each other. The room fell silent save for the soft crackling of the fireplace. Ella traced the rim of her cup, her eyes lowered. Finally, she looked up. If any other lord had asked for a military alliance while I was still cleaning up a rebellion, I would have had them thrown out. But, she exhaled softly, you are far superior to me in governing people and balancing power. If we share the risk, you'd better do your best for me. Benjamin bowed, a sincere, aristocratic gesture as Evelyn stepped forward to present the formal terms. The contract was meticulous. Frosttown would provide grain and industrial goods, while Ironforge would supply ore at a friendly price. Especially the dust crystals, Benjamin added quickly. Buying from others is a ripoff. Ella laughed, the tension breaking. It depends on my mood, but if you make a breakthrough with them, don't you dare hide it from me. As the meeting drew to a close, Ella's tone turned uncharacteristically gentle. I am grateful, Benjamin, truly. In this storm, I no longer feel like I'm sailing a dilapidated boat alone. I know there is another captain beside me, and he is reliable. Benjamin felt the weight of the moment and, true to form, tried to deflect with a joke, earning a fierce glare from Ella. Don't ruin the mood, she snapped before turning serious once more. Is that all you require? One more thing, Benjamin said, his eyes drifting to Evelyn. He spoke of the villagers he had seen, imprisoned and robbed by petty nobles at illegal checkpoints. I don't think that's right, he said firmly. Let those old, broken rules go to hell. The people who live on this land are far more than just nobles. Benjamin's extended stay in Hearthheart was not merely a gesture of friendship. While Ella used the disrespect of missing her victory celebration to force his hand, Benjamin saw a golden opportunity for a newbie baron to learn. He followed Ella through the messy aftermath of rebellion, watching her navigate the paralysis of a government without its middle management. As he whispered to his aide, Evelyn, even mistakes are experiences. The victory banquet was a blur of plentiful food and heavy drinking, ending with Ella's public announcement of a deep alliance between Hearthheart and Frosttown. But the true weight of the journey appeared the next morning. At the castle gates, Benjamin found his small party had grown into a massive caravan. Ella had gifted him 20 master craftsmen and over 400 refugees, a mix of displaced farmers and laborers she wanted off her hands. To sweeten the deal, she provided travel rations and a precious basket of dust crystal ore for Benjamin's research. As they prepared to leave, Ella appeared not in her banquet finery but in simple clothes, her face clouded with a rare, quiet sadness. Sensing her loneliness, Benjamin teased her, urging her to write long, serialized letters about every noble she scolded. Ella laughed, shoving his shoulder with a defiant smile. Get lost, handyman, I'm busy rebuilding. Stop getting in my way. With a final wave, Benjamin gave the order, let's go back to Frosttown. Leading 400 souls is no small feat. Benjamin spent the days riding between the lines, making himself a familiar face to his new citizens. Beside him rode Diona, while Evelyn coordinated the rear. But as they crossed a flat, wooded, hilly area, the sky turned a leaden gray. A single cold crystal landed on Benjamin's nose, then another. It's snowing, Diona asked, his voice filled with dread. Winter is still 2 months away. The early snow was a grim omen for their food and fuel reserves. Benjamin looked back at the refugees, thin, tattered, and shivering in the damp cold. He knew he had to act before morale collapsed. Turning his horse to face the freezing crowd, he raised his voice over the wind. Gentlemen, the weather isn't cooperating, but Frosttown is just ahead. I promise you, the moment we arrive, every man, woman, and child will receive a bowl of hot, thick meat stew. For hot soup, a craftsman shouted. The cry spread through the line, and despite the biting wind, the heavy pace of the caravan quickened toward home. Chesvia has been acting strange lately. This unease did not originate from the outside. Frosttown was running smoothly under Suleiman's management. The problem lay deep within her. It was an indescribable feeling, as if a cold fog filled her consciousness, and every now and then icy fingers would reach out to scratch at her nerves. In those blurred seconds after waking, she would fall into a strange trance. She felt certain she was in an unfamiliar place, a wasteland of pale flowers, a silent, towering spire. Or a THLY still sea of stars. Panic would overwhelm her. Where am I? What am I doing here? Until her gaze focused on the familiar ceiling beams of the Lord's guest room. She realized with a chilling clarity that she had locked away a specific memory or promise and thrown the key into that fog. One morning, after waking with deep shadows under her eyes, Chesvia headed to the experimental fields. The frost-covered cabbages were thriving, but the turnip experiment had reached a frustrating impasse. As she squatted in the dirt, concentrating her white nen blade threads to sense the plant's life rhythm, the fence gate was kicked open with a loud *** bang. Marie rushed in like a small cannonball, her face flushed. "Brother is back," she shouted. Benjamin's return caused a massive stir. As the Lord's banner appeared on the road, the townspeople gathered in an enthusiastic, relieved crowd. Walter, the loyal knight, met them at the gate, his face grim with regret that he hadn't been there to protect the Baron during the counterinsurgency war. Diona, sensing his frustration, began to recount Benjamin's exploits with dramatic flair, describing giant crossbows and trembling city walls. Chesvia, holding Marie's hand, weaved through the joyful chaos. She found Benjamin in the center of the crowd, already deep in a heated discussion with his brother Jean about new designs for dust crystal crossbow bolts. Marie broke free and rushed into Benjamin's arms. He gave the little girl a firm hug, then raised his head. His gaze passed over the crowd and landed on Chesvia. He walked toward her, tilting his head with a familiar spark in his eyes. "Should I say it's been a long time?" Chesvia looked at him quietly, confirming he was truly there. Finally, she allowed a faint, genuine smile to touch her lips.